Am I Enough? A Biracial Story. Written by Jesse A. MacBeth. Narrated by Terry Briscoe. Forward. Growing up biracial in a country that is still plagued with issues of race and colorism has always been difficult. Dealing with an internal identity crisis that is exacerbated by half of racial makeup that is ruled by colorism makes figuring out who you are and where you fit in even worse. This book is dedicated to the biracial men and women whose voice is lost in blackness. Our experience is different and unique in the way that we are seen as misfits. We are used by both of our races to prove a point, or to be the whipping boy for their own racial insecurity and angst. This book will be brutally honest and raw. If you are not ready to hear the biracial perspective, then I suggest you put this book down and continue thinking that we biracials want to be accepted by you, and somehow need your validation for our existence. I am a half-black and half-Arab man. It took me a long time to embrace who and what I am. The term biracial encompasses many different racial mixes. In this book, we will focus on the half-black, half-white mulatto experience. Colorism. When people hear the word colorism, they think of some racist white person degrading a black man or woman. They think of white supremacy. They never think of biracial people and the inherent identity crisis that comes with being biracial, nor would they fathom the racial hate and colorism that many biracial men and women face coming from black people. It seems black Americans suffer the same complex that Jewish people in Israel do. They come from a history of oppression and abuse, only to turn around and inflict that same pain and oppression on another group of people. Myself being half black, I can understand the oppression that monoracial, both parents are the same race, black people face. My father was a very dark-skinned man from Mississippi. My mother is a very pale Arab woman from Egypt. Through my father, I am a direct descendant of the transatlantic slave trade. On my father's side, I am 4 to 5 generations away from being born a slave. My father was born in 1943. He was a black man who was born with no rights in this country, purely because of his skin tone. He was considered 3/5 of a man. He was not even looked upon as being a human being. Again, he was born and raised in the south of Mississippi. He would run around barefoot and see men who shared his image hanging from trees. I am 1 generation from being born without rights in this country. I mention all of this so you, the reader, can understand my frustration when I am told by the black community that you're not black enough, or stop pretending to be black. My skin tone is light. My hair is not nearly as nappy as monoracial black men. My features are a bit more European looking. But I'm expected to throw away my father's side and what he suffered because me claiming my blackness makes monoracial black people uncomfortable. As much as monoracial black people want to point the finger at white people for racism and colorism, they promote it among their own and the offspring they choose to make with other races. One would never think that a half-black person would be physically assaulted by black people purely on the basis of their skin tone. That dark-skinned monoracial black girls and women would attack a biracial woman purely because her skin is lighter and her hair is straighter. The biracial girl is seen as beautiful because of those things, while dark-skinned black people are not. Many people outside of the biracial and black communities are stunned when they hear of the abuse biracial people take at the hands of black people. This racial hate for biracial men and women stems from the same place that drove racism in white people towards black people: jealousy and lust. We can't deny that black men and women have been fetishized sexually by the world. The black woman for her larger features, and the man for his endowment. We are seen in the same eyes of jealousy and lust from black people. As a biracial man, black women have always fetishized me. They loved my skin tone and my hair. I could walk into any black community and have the pick of any woman there. Black men know this and hated my guts for it. A black woman they would like would suddenly ignore them and their dark skin and aggressively approach me. They fetishized me and the want for a lighter-skinned baby they could produce with me. The urge and importance they put on having a lighter-skinned child was disgusting looking back at it. The self-hatred was appalling. But as a young man just coming into my sex life, I was not thinking upon those terms. Having the attention and desire of women was all that mattered at that age. Because of black women choosing me over black men, I became the object of hate and scorn by black men. I can't count how many times I was jumped and beaten because I was biracial, and that was what black women preferred. If I was not being jumped, I was berated and teased for not being black enough. My skin tone became just as much of a hindrance to me in the black community as it was in the white community. I was hated for it on both ends of the spectrum. On one side, I was just a nigger no matter how light I was. On the other side, I was not black enough and was treated with the same racial animosity. I was one of the few males of African descent in my school, so I was used to being called a nigger by white kids or having my hair touched. Teachers would go out of their way to speak to me in Ebonics. To whites, I was just another black kid with nappy hair. They didn't see that my skin was a bit lighter or my hair was curly. All they saw in me was my father's bloodline. It was hard trying to go and talk to the black kids about this. They would laugh and tell me about the white privilege I had, then call me an Oreo. Then when I would try to talk to white people about black people hating me for my skin tone, but they would look at me with some dumbstruck look on their faces and avoid that conversation. I found myself alone and isolated a lot. I would gravitate to other biracial or mixed race kids who shared the same feelings of being an outcast, the same struggle of not fitting in. As a biracial man, I feel that the hate I got was light compared to the women. The dynamic was the opposite here. Biracial and mixed race women were fetishized by black men and hated by black women. Though the men would try to jump me, they would never face me one-on-one. Let's face it, I've always been very tall and very athletic. These men were cowards. Black women would assault biracial women and hold them down so they could cut their hair. How jealous and hateful do you have to be to go to those lengths? Can you imagine the self-hate one would have to be so infuriated by a half-black woman's straighter hair that you would physically assault her and cut it off her head? Furthermore, can you imagine the trauma that was caused to that biracial woman for her to know that she was hated so much by a black woman because of her hair and racial mix that they would attack her? This sounds like something you would hear about in the Jim Crow era against black people. One would never think that it was black people racially oppressing and assaulting biracial and mixed people on the same level that black people were oppressed 70 years ago. I interviewed a biracial woman to who this happened to. I will discuss this in detail in the chapter dedicated to her. There was this one incident as a kid that I remember starkly. Looking back at it still hurts. I know that some people may laugh it off and think it's nothing, but this was just as hurtful to me as throwing a banana at a black person would be. The insinuation is that they are monkeys. It's a racial slur. It's a hurtful comment to degrade them. There was a kid called Oreo Boy. Black people would bring Oreos from home and throw them at him. They would laugh and call him an albino monkey. They claimed he was pretending to be black, that he was an abomination. What society may laugh at as a joke was just as racially offensive as a white person throwing bananas at a black person. How could you survive racism and Jim Crow only to racially oppress someone else? I could relate to Oreo Boy. I know most of us biracials can. I can relate to being told, I'm not enough. To stop pretending to be black, as if the blood of my black father did not run through my veins. Oreo Boy. White boy, a cruel voice called after me. My heart raced as I ran down the near-empty hallway. I knew if I could make it to the bus loading area, I would be safe. The guys always picked on me. They hated it because I was half white. Well, at least that's how they made it seem. They always teased me for my complexion. I went to an all-black school in the hood. I was one of maybe a handful of lighter-skinned kids there. I hated it. Why couldn't I just be darker? You think you better than us, don't you, Cracker? A big black kid asked. As he stepped in front of me, I was only a few feet away from the door that led to the buses and safety. I didn't make it. I was seconds away from not being beaten by these black kids. If only I had left class early. No, I don't. I'm black too, I replied. Really? The black kid replied. The other black kids that were chasing me had caught up to me. "Y'all hear that?" He said he is black too, the black kid in front of me mocked. The others laughed, as if me saying this was some joke. My father was black. Yeah, I was several shades lighter. But I was still black, wasn't I? "Can I just go home?" I asked timidly. "Yassa massa, we good niggas will let you go home," one of the black kids mocked. I flinched. I knew what was coming next. I closed my eyes and waited for the hits to come. But strangely, the blows didn't come. I opened one eye to see the black boys laughing at me. "We are not gonna beat you today, white boy," one of the black boys said. "So you're black like us, right?" another one asked. I nodded. I knew something bad was going to happen. I could see the malice in their eyes. The bigger black kid nodded at the others, and they grabbed my arms and held them firmly. "Let's add some color to you so you can be black like us," the bigger black kid said. He wrapped his big black hands around my wrist and forearm and squeezed. He leaned down so his face was inches from mine. "We are going to put some color in your skin, Oreo," the bigger black kid said. His breath was putrid. He spit as he spoke, and it sprayed my face. He spoke with such hatred for me, it chilled me to my core. I couldn't understand what I had ever done to them for them to hate me so much. He twisted his huge hands on my arm as he squeezed. It was painful and burned. I could see my skin redden as he twisted his hands faster. "Gonna Indian burn some color on you," the bigger black kid said. His eyes were wide like he was crazed. The other black boys that grabbed me laughed. I screamed in pain and struggled. I wanted to break free and run. It felt like my arm was on fire. The more he twisted, the more it hurt. After what seemed like forever, he stopped and stared at his work. My light brown arm was bruised and discolored. "You're darker already, white boy," the bigger black kid mocked. He grabbed my other arm, and Indian burned it as well. I kicked him as hard as I could in his groin. He doubled over in pain. The black kids that held me pushed me hard against the tiled school hallway wall. "You all right, man?" one of them asked. The bigger kid looked as though he was going to cry. He stared at me for a long moment. The hate in his eyes seemed to pulse with the rapid beating of his heart. "Kill him," he gasped. The other black kids hesitated for a moment. They stared at me like they really didn't want to beat me. But they were more afraid of the bigger black kid than the possibility of beating me to a pulp. I closed my eyes. I didn't struggle. There was no point. As soon as they started to hit me, I dropped to the floor and curled up in a ball. I had seen this on an anti-bullying video. Sadly, kids like myself, who didn't know how to fight, had come up with techniques to lessen the damage of the blows. I protected my face and stomach, while they kicked and punched me on my arms and legs. It still hurt a lot, but I would survive. "Stop!" a familiar female voice shouted. Her voice was like water touching parched lips. She was an angel. A bright light that glowed in the darkness of my life. She was black, but she didn't treat me like the black boys did. She pushed the black boys out of the way and put herself between me and them. The bigger black kid had recovered enough to stand. He still cupped his groin tenderly. "Why do you like this fucking mutt, Talea?" the bigger black kid gasped. The jealousy and envy in his voice could be heard by all. It dripped from his mouth like venom. "Just because I don't want to see a kid bullied doesn't mean I like him," Talea shot back. The bigger black kid glared at her in frustration. He had always had a crush on Talea, but she never gave him the time of day. "You traitors always loved the mutts over your own," the bigger black kid replied. Talea saw the bruises on my arms and sighed. She tenderly touched it. I winced in pain. "Fucking Oreo lover," the bigger black kid said. He turned and motioned for the others and limped away. Monica. I hated going to school. It wasn't that I hated learning. I loved to read and study. I just hated going to a predominantly black school. For someone like me who loves learning, going to a mostly black school was frustrating. I was not challenged there academically. It seemed like all the students had this complex that they were going to fail, and it was all the fault of white America. I found it disheartening that even in grade school, their mindset was already on failure. I was a pariah in my school for many reasons. Only among the ignorant do you find skin tone a hindrance or the main topic of a social hierarchy. Me being one of the smartest kids in the school did not help me at all. The dumber, predominantly black kids attributed my academic success to the fact that I was half white. It didn't matter to them that I worked and studied very hard. Instead of going to the mall or parties, I enjoyed reading books. I wanted to get out of the dump called the hood. I wanted to be far away from these violent and ignorant people. My mother was white. She passed away early in my life, so it has just been me and my father. I love my father more than anything in this world. He is a dark-skinned black man. He was not like the knuckle-dragging Neanderthal that permeates most places known as the hood. He was a professor at a local college. He did not make much, so we were forced to live among the willfully ignorant. Among the ignorant, you will see violence daily. My father was considered a coon or Uncle Tom because he was educated and did not act or think the same way as everyone else. I took on my father's love for education and his overt mannerisms. But of course, I was not berated for that. Had I been dark-skinned like my father, I would have experienced the hate that he did. Black people in the hood do not like nor embrace differences in thought. If you were educated, they marked you as trying to be white. It's sad that wanting more than living in poverty and ignorance made you an outcast and subject to violence among your own people. I had something that was more of an insult to black people than just education. I was half white. My skin tone was a light honey brown. My features were not as broad, and my hair was long and curly. I was everything they wanted to be, but they knew they could never be. Despite their vocal hate for whiteness, they longed to be near it. And they envied those who were obviously black, but were much closer to whiteness than they were. As I said earlier, only ignorant fools put so much stock in pigmentation. It never occurred to me to want to be anything else than what I was. I was a biracial girl who was hated by the black community because of my racial mix. But of course, one would never label black people racist for racially oppressing people for their skin tone or race. Black people have fought for and will continue to fight to be the perpetual world victims. After school, I would have a long 2-mile walk to my house. My father, as poor as he was, owned his home. He inherited it from his father. My grandfather was horrible with money. By the time he passed away, the bank was preparing to take the house. My father worked hard to get caught up on the back payments and eventually pay the house off. My father was one of the few black men to own anything. He took great pride in his old house. He maintained it as best he could. He saved money to get a new roof and upgrade things. His dream was to pass this house on to me. He would always look at me and say, "Monica, I want you to have a head start in this world. This home is not much, but one day it will be yours." I had something that so many black families in my neighborhood would never have. I had property. I lived in a house with a yard, while they lived in roach-infested projects. Of course, this only made them hate me more. They assumed that because I was half white was why I lived in a house instead of a tiny project apartment like them. It never once crossed their minds that my dark-skinned black father worked his ass off to get an education, just to get something better for himself and me. Everything was the fault of white people and whiteness to them. I hated being around black people, not because they were black, but because of the cultural mentality that seemed to infest them at an early age. My father was not like them. I guess education canceled out the victim mentality of the ignorant. Walking that 2-mile trek home used to be a peaceful thing for me. It was a way for me to deal with the frustration of dealing with the sexual drooling and advances of black boys and men who lusted after my light skin and features. It was a way for me to process the hate I received from black women and girls. "There that white girl go," I heard a voice shout. My heart started to race. I knew what was going to happen. A car revved up behind me. I thought of running, but I knew I could not outrun a car. I tried to still my beating heart and act as tough as I could. To me, these black girls were like rabid animals. They only respected strength. If they smelt fear, they would pounce on you. Look at this white bitch walking like she's better than us, a black girl shouted from the car. There were several black girls and women in the vehicle. Some I recognized, and others I did not. Some looked like adults. I would not be surprised if it was their mothers with them. All black women seemed to hate us biracial women. No matter what I did, my very existence was a constant reminder that they were black and could never be me. I did not respond to them. I just kept walking. I hoped they would say what they had to say and keep driving. But then again, I was not dealing with normal human beings. These were rabid black girls who blamed all of their issues on whiteness. I heard a door slam behind me. I turned to see several of the black girls get out. I was debating if I should run or not. One of the girls looked like she was pregnant. She was not much older than me. What would possess a pregnant girl to get into a physical confrontation willingly was beyond me. I decided to face them. I was no coward. My dad had taught me how to throw a punch. I felt like I had a leg up. Most, if not all, of these black girls that were quickly closing the distance between their car and me probably didn't know their father's name. I didn't know white bitches lived in our neighborhood, one of the black girls said. I knew this would end in a fight. The girl talking was the leader of their pack of wild animals. I dropped my backpack. I figured if I could drop her, the others would leave me alone. I faced her and put my hands up like my father taught me. The white bitch wants to fight, one of the black girls mocked. I studied the 5 black girls before hoping to figure out who the others followed. None of them stepped forward to fight. They all nudged each other, hoping one of them would step forward. I smirked at them. Just as I thought, a bunch of cowardly ghetto bitches, I said. I picked up my backpack and turned to continue home. Before I could start walking, one of the girls screamed in rage behind me. I felt my hair being pulled. My scalp stung, and my eyes started to water. "Let go of me!" I screamed. I tried to turn around, but the girl would yank my hair harder and keep out of my reach. "Get her!" The black girl pulling my hair shouted. The other girls pounced on me. I felt fists and feet hit me all over. The wind was knocked out of me, and I fell to my knees. I could feel blood on my face. My head hurt really bad. "Hold this bitch down," an older black woman said. "Okay, mama," the girl pulling my hair replied. I was thrown to the dirty, cracked concrete sidewalk. My face was on the hot pavement. The sidewalk was stained with God only knows what, like everything else in the hood. The sidewalks were dirty and broken. I felt a heavy pressure on my back. My breathing was ragged. Someone held my legs and my arms. I wanted to scream, but there was so much pressure on my back that I could barely breathe. "My daughter's been telling me about you. You think because you're half white, that makes you better than everyone else," the older black woman said. I tried to shake my head to indicate that I didn't feel that way, but it was pointless. If I tried to move, my head hurt worse. I felt like I was going to pass out. "Just so you don't get confused and think you're not black like the rest of us, I'm going to cut off that nice long curly hair of yours," the older black woman said. The black girls laughed as the older woman pulled a pocket knife from her purse. "Pull her hair tightly," the older black woman ordered. I wanted to scream so badly. They pressed my face firmly against the dirty, cracked pavement and pulled my hair hard. I couldn't help but cry. I hated the fact that I cried in front of them. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had hurt me, but it was too late for that now. The tears flowed freely. I could feel the dull blade of her pocket knife sawing at my hair. Like a frayed rope slowly breaking, my hair was cut. She yanked hard and held up a fistful of my hair. The younger girls howled and jeered at me in victory. They looked like savages celebrating a fresh kill. "You're no better than us, little yellow bitch," the older black woman said. She shoved her fistful of my long curly hair in front of my face that was still pressed firmly against the pavement. I screamed as loud as I could. My head throbbed, and my eyes felt like they were going to pop out of my head. I don't know why they were so thrilled to harm me like this. There was a terrifying look of satisfaction in their eyes, as if every fiber of their being rejoiced at seeing a half-breed suffer. "Knock that yellow bitch out," the older black woman growled. She held the fistful of my curly hair to her thick nappy head, admiring it. She seemed lost for a moment, as if she saw herself with my hair. It dawned on me as I felt the first fist and kicks of the black girls hit me. Their hate for me had nothing to do with me. They hated me because they hated themselves. I started to black out. I smiled as I felt a cool darkness come from me. They will always be miserable and stuck in the skin and body they hate. Because of that self-hate, I will be better than them. Stop smiling, mutt, one of the girls shouted as she kicked me hard in my face. I blacked out, bloody and beaten, but victorious. Jordan. It's time to clean our blood of the taint of niggers, a middle-aged bearded white man shouted. White power! Many white men in the room shouted. I raised my beige fist in the air and shouted with them. My eyes were a deep blue that almost seemed to glow in contrast to my skin tone. My hair was light brown and curly. I kept it short to hide the obvious nigger in my blood. I'm biracial. My father was a dark-skinned black man who, like most niggers, didn't care about his children. Maybe if he did, I would not have found myself here. A light-skinned half-black man with blue eyes at a white power rally. I hated niggas because I hated my father. I hated every ounce of nigger blood that ran through my veins. My white brothers for the most part accepted me. I was a part of their push to absorb half-white biracial people. I could atone for the sin of my birth, for being the abomination I am, by marrying a white woman and ensuring my nigger taint in me is slowly bred out. But some would never accept me. To them, I was just another nigger pretending to be white. I could not blame them. Sometimes I felt the same way. We accept our half-nigger brothers who accept us and are willing to breed out the taint in their blood, the middle-aged man said. I could feel the eyes of the room turn towards me. I was always the odd man out here, despite all the work I put in for the brotherhood. I raised my fist high in the air and shouted, White power! Many of my white brothers joined me, but others shook their head in disgust. No matter what I did, I would never have some of my brothers' respect. I would never be just white like them. I could only hope my children were white enough to pass, that they would not have to endure this same mistrust from their white peers. Our numbers are getting smaller every year. Too many pure-blood white men and women are creating half-niggers. The only way to stop us from being bred out is to accept these abominations and have them breed back into whiteness, the middle-aged white man shouted. I could sense a fear in the room. I have discovered the biggest fear among my white brothers was being erased. It was true, they were. Being white was almost illegal. Every other race can have pride in who and what they were, but if a white man was proud of his pure Anglo-Saxon Aryan blood, he was considered a racist. Yet a nigger can say he is black and proud all day. White values and culture were being erased. We all know that to destroy your people, you have to first destroy their culture and identity. The proud white identity was being destroyed and replaced with a more passive, placating white man. That was a hard pill to swallow for a race of men that built and empowered the world as we know it. I know many of my brothers would never accept that. It was hard for them to accept a half-blood like myself, who would be sleeping with their pure Aryan white women. Pure Aryan women were hard enough to find these days, yet alone ones that were down for the race. I was their half-breed dog, and I would be fed the scraps that the true Aryan brothers did not want. As our leader has said many times, we all have to make sacrifices for the betterment of our people. I guess getting with an unattractive woman for the sake of breeding the nigger from lineage was a sacrifice I had to make. I had to do my part to advance my Aryan race. Being that I was a mutt, my options were limited. As dedicated as I was, I had my moments of confusion. I was patrolling our neighborhood for niggers and illegals when I saw a nigger parked in front of a house. This was a house of a known hoe, but she was Aryan. She was protected here as long as she did not fuck niggas. I am a prime example of what happens when pure Aryan blood is defiled with nigger taint. Hey, boy! I shouted as I approached the car. The vehicle was an older red muscle car. If he was not a nigger, I would have complimented him on his taste. He probably stole the car. He turned and looked at me. I was disgusted by his dark flesh and features. His face was furrowed in frustration. He had to know this was an Aryan neighborhood and his kind were not welcome here. Niggas may want to breed themselves out of existence by fucking everything besides their own women, but we Aryans did not. We loved our blood and wanted to preserve our race. If there was a nigger in our neighborhood, it's because he wants one of our women. I don't blame him. Who would not want to breed up? He started to get out of his car as I approached. He was big, and I could not let him get the upper hand. I rushed him and hit him as hard as I could on his black face. He was still halfway in his car. I slammed the door several times on him. "Stop, man," he pleaded. I hit him in the face several more times for good measure. I was honestly disgusted by him. They act tough, but when it comes down to it, they are subservient cowards. How else could you explain allowing yourself and your people to be enslaved for over 100 years? How could these big niggas sit back and watch a white man rape their women? They were spineless cowards and deserved no respect. "I hate niggas like you," I spat at him. The black man looked at me long and hard for a moment. It seemed like he was studying my face. His eyes darted to my short brown hair. A smile that made his teeth look extremely white against the backdrop of his black skin cracked his bloody and swollen face. "You're a white supremacist?" the black man mocked. He coughed and spat out blood. He shook his black head at me. I felt rage fill me. Though I hated to admit it, I knew what he was talking about. He could see the tainted black blood of my father in me. If this nigga could see it so plainly, then my Aryan brothers definitely could. I pulled out my gun and pointed at his nigger head. He stopped laughing. I knew it would not be long before he started to beg for his life, but I was wrong. He smiled. "You hate me because you are me." "You'll get your nigga wake-up call soon enough," the black man said. He smiled broadly and laughed at me. My hand shook. I was already experiencing this so-called nigga wake-up call. A lot of my white brothers looked at me with the same hate and disgust as I looked at this nigga before me. My Aryan brothers tolerated me because they needed to keep their bloodline going. They knew they were being bred out. So breeding the white back into the half-breeds was their plan to retake their Aryan blood from the nigger taint. "I'll never be you, nigga," I shouted. I don't remember pulling the trigger. It seemed like I stepped from my body and watched some crazed man who looked like me murder someone. I emptied my clip into him. He fell after the first shot pierced his skull. I pointed at his bloody head and continued pulling the trigger. "I'm no nigger," I shouted. Even after my clip was spent, I kept pulling the trigger. The world seemed engulfed in silence, as if everything knew what I did, and they were accusing me with their silence. The only sound was the steady clicking of the trigger being pulled. "What the holy fuck?" I turned and pointed my gun at the man who spoke. "Hey, calm the fuck down, Jordan." I was in a haze. My heart raced, and I could hardly breathe. It took me a moment, but I recognized my Aryan brother. I took a deep calming breath, and the haze started to fade. My hands shook. I had that nigga's blood splattered all over my body. My Aryan brother looked at me. He didn't know if he should congratulate me on killing my first nigger, or condemn me for the heat this would bring to this area. Everyone knew this was an Aryan neighborhood, that if you were not white in this neighborhood after sundown, you would die here. No one has enforced that for many years. Hence how half-breeds with tainted nigger blood in their veins like myself came about. "Run to the meeting hall, shower, and burn those clothes," the Aryan brother said. He stuck out his hand and looked at the gun that shook in my trembling hand. I hesitated for a moment, but gave it to him. "I'm going to call Mitchell, the brother who will handle this. You just lay low at the meeting hall, okay?" the Aryan brother said. I nodded. My throat seemed incredibly dry. I licked my lips and gagged at the taste of blood. I shook my head and looked at the mangled face of the black man I had just murdered. I had shot him so many times his face was not recognizable. It looked like a bloody ball of flesh. I felt dizzy. The adrenaline was leaving my body, and the reality of what I had just done sunk in. I had murdered a man simply for seeing the black blood of my father in me, He mocked me. Maybe he was right to do so. I was a half-black man trying to hate half of who I was. Go now, Jordan, the Aryan brother shouted. My legs felt like they weighed a ton. My Aryan brother was right. I had to get out of here. I turned and forced my body, which was still in shock, to move. I ran as fast as I could to the meeting hall. It was an old, abandoned building that the Brotherhood secretly repurposed for those that needed to hide. For those honored among the Brotherhood who were wanted by the law. The outside was boarded up, and it looked like a regular condemned house. But the inside was decorated and decked out to sustain the long-term survival of the brothers that needed it. The meeting hall had one rule. There could be no sound coming from the house. There was TV, but you had to watch it with headphones. Brothers came by every week and kept the refrigerator stocked. A brother lived in a house next to it, and electricity was wired from his house to the meeting hall. The wires were buried, as not to give suspicion. The same with the internet. I didn't know if I should feel honored to be able to hide in the meeting hall or be afraid that the law would be looking for me. I rounded the corner and was out of breath. The meeting hall was just a block away. Half-breed, I heard a voice behind me. I turned and felt a sharp blow land on my cheek. I stumbled back. I was hit again. I don't remember falling, but I hit the dirt hard. Mitchell sends his regards. You're not Aryan and never will be, boy, the man said. I saw him lift his heavy boot. I knew this was it for me. I had killed a nigger and put the Brotherhood at risk. I looked up at the proud white brother and watched as his boot came down on my skull. Oreo Boy. What's wrong, baby? Suzanne asked. Suzanne was my mother. She was a portly white woman in her early 40s. She was the reason why I hated myself. If not for her, I would just be black, and I would not have these problems. I would not be constantly picked on by black kids. I would not feel so isolated and alone. I hated my mother for being white. I hated the fact that she was not some racist asshole that hated black men. My life would be so much easier if I was just black enough. Hell, even if I was darker, I could pretend to just be black. I didn't know how to answer my mother. No matter what I said, she'd never understand. My father left a long time ago. He found a black woman and started a black family with them and left me with my white mother. It seemed I was not even black enough for my black father. My mother loved me, but not enough to claim me as white. To her, I was always just her black son. I was not even biracial to her. I was just black. To the rest of the world, I was not black enough. I was biracial, and the black community never missed an opportunity to remind me that I came from a white womb. It's funny how race works. Because my father was black, the white side of my family could only see the black in me. I would never be white to them. The black community only saw the white in me. I would never be black to them. I hated feeling so displaced. I looked at my mother and the concern on her face. She would never understand what her lust for black men has done to me, what she has made me. I hate being biracial, I said. My voice was cracked with anger and pain. Oh, baby, my mother said. She wrapped her white arms around me and kissed me gently on my forehead. I could not help but cry. Something about the arms of your mother that takes all your pain away. I hated my mother, but I loved her as well. I blamed her for making me biracial. I don't know why I didn't blame my father. Maybe because he was not around, or because he was what I wanted to be. If he had stuck around, he could help me navigate this. He could teach me how to be a black man. My mother did not understand any of this. If she did, she could not speak on it without fear of being called a racist. She was not part of the black community and didn't understand the intense self-hate and loathing that infested the black community. Nor could she fathom black-on-black racism. She could not begin to understand how black people could be racist and oppressive to black people they deemed were not black enough. In the eyes of my white family, the one-drop rule was still in effect. In essence, I was just another nigger to them. They had to tolerate me because I was their family. My arms hurt badly where the black kid had Indian burned me. I winced as I pulled away from my mother. Thankfully, she did not notice. I watched her as she got up and left my room. I know she wanted to help me, but she was just as lost as I was when it came to things of race. Thinking about it, I don't feel like my father could understand any better than my mother. He was not biracial either. He was lost in being black, and I was alone. I sighed deeply and took out a magazine from beneath my pillow. I think I've found an answer. I stared at the nicely bronzed white people on the cover. They were tan. They owned a tanning store. If those tanning machines could give white people my skin tone, I had no doubt they could give me a normal black skin color. I could finally be black enough. I just had to hide my mother. I stared longingly at the tanning beds displayed in the magazine. They were my salvation. They were the instruments that would change my life. I would always be biracial, but I could hide it. I would not stick out like a sore thumb. My mother thought I was going to a friend's house, but in reality, I was going to break into this tanning salon and fix the error of my parents. I was going to take my life into my own hands and become the person I always felt I was. I wanted to be black so badly, to be accepted. Maybe if I was blacker, my father would come back. Maybe he would love me and want to spend time with me. I can't explain how bad it hurt to see him interact with his full black kids. He truly loved them, while I, his half-white son, was discarded. I was replaced by a better non-mixed version. I was an old defective model. My half-siblings were the kids he wanted. I had to do this. I stood and took a deep breath. I put on a hoodie my father gave me years ago. It did not fit, but it still made me feel good to wear it. It was one of the few things he had given me. I walked out of my room and down the stairs. My mother was in the kitchen. She loved to sing as she cooked. I always thought she had an amazing voice. She smiled at me as I walked to the garage door. She knew I normally rode my bike around this time. I was always back in time for dinner. My stomach growled as I smelt it. "Baby, I'm making something special for you tonight," my mother said. She ran over and gave me a big hug. I melted in her soft arms. She kissed me gently on my curly head. "You're enough for me, son, okay? When you get older, you will find that you're enough for yourself," my mother said. Tears started to well up in her beautiful green eyes. "I love you, son," she said. I had to fight back the sob that threatened to come up. Only a mother could break you down so easily. I nodded. I would be enough for me soon. I hoped my mother understood. I hoped she accepted the new darker me. She loved my dark-skinned father very deeply. When she thought I was asleep, I could hear her crying for him. I don't remember why he left, but the fact remains he left us behind. My mother tried to be strong for me, but I knew her heart was broken. Even after all these years, if my father suddenly appeared at the door, she would accept him back. I pushed away from her and smiled at her. She smiled back and went back to the kitchen and continued to sing her song. She didn't know that I knew that was my father's favorite song. "I'll be back, and I'll actually be black," I said to myself. As I walked into my garage and hit the button that lifts the large garage door, I sat on my bike and took a deep breath. There was no going back. I had to come back blacker. This was my last big effort to be black enough. I know I could not continue to live like this. Suicide was never far from my mind. I thought about it often. Our parents may love us, but they don't understand the struggle they birthed us into. Maybe if the world was different, maybe if racism was not a thing, being biracial would not sting so much. But to be born of the two races that seemed constantly at war with each other made it impossible for me to exist in peace. My mind seemed to be in a constant battle. The master in me wanted to overpower the slave. The slave just wanted to be free. I felt more like the slave. I wanted to be free of the white in me. I rode my bike in silence. Even my normally active mind was abnormally still. It was almost like my entire body was warning me against this. It was a silent protest against the actions I was about to take. Or maybe they were mourning the old me. I knew I would walk away from this a different boy. My life would forever change. My heart started to race as I saw the tanning salon off in the distance. This salon closed at 4, and it was already past 6. I didn't see any cars in the parking lot. I had watched this salon for days. I knew it had a back door that was in the alley next to the trash cans. I had spent weeks loosening the hinges so I could easily detach the door enough to open it and slide in. I didn't want to take the entire door off the hinges, just pry it open enough so I could squeeze in. I was tall and skinny. It would not take much for me to squeeze in the small opening. I rolled into the alley and looked around for a moment. No one was in sight. I placed my ear on the door and took a deep breath to slow my heart. My heart pounded so hard in my chest that it was almost deafening. I listened intently. It was silent. I smiled weakly. There was still time. I could turn away now. But I knew I could not back away even if I wanted to. I was so close to being fully black, to finally being enough. I dreamed of this tanning machine burning away the white blood in me. I knew it didn't work that way, but at least I could fake it. I grabbed the bottom of the metal door. There was a small space there. Of course, it was too small for anything to creep through. But it was enough for me to slide my hand under. I pulled and strained for several long moments until I felt the door budge. The hinges on the bottom of the door came loose. I was able to pull the door up enough from the bottom for me to slide in on my back. The smell of this place hit me immediately. It smelled of lotions. It had a faint vanilla smell to the room. I knew where the tanning beds were. I came to this place often and discussed tanning with the employees there. They all knew me well. I watched videos online on how to work the tanning beds. I went over to one of them and smiled. I touched the smooth surface. It looked futuristic to me, like something you would find in a spaceship. Oddly enough, it reminded me of a big silver hot dog bun with blue lights that glowed in its middle. Normally, tanners would put on a thin layer of suntan lotion to keep them from burning, but I wanted to burn. I wanted the burn to last. I was not sure how many times I could come here and do this without getting caught. I was too young legally to tan, so I had to sneak. I located the on button on the side of the tanning bed. I turned it on too high. My body trembled as I stood before the machine. I was going to do this. This blessed machine was my salvation. It was the end of my torment. I stripped naked and lay on the tanning bed. I felt like I was laying on some alien contraption. I could feel the warmth of the blue light that emanated from it. I reached my hand up slowly and pulled down the lid. It fell fast and latched. I didn't expect the lid to be so heavy. I had set the timer for 30 minutes. It would unlatch when the time was up. It started to heat up in the tanning bed quickly. Was it supposed to get this hot? It was bearable for now. If this minor discomfort was what I had to endure to burn away this pale biracial flesh, then it was worth it. A few minutes in and it got hotter. My vision was blurry and it was hard to breathe. It was very uncomfortable now. I could feel my flesh burning. The pain came on suddenly. I screamed. I knew I was in here alone. I had made sure of it. There was no one here to help me. I was going to die in a tanning bed. It got hotter and the pain more intense. I tried to push the lid, but screamed as my hands burned. My flesh was melting off my body. I don't know why I thought of my mother, but I did. I missed her singing. I wished I was home eating her delicious food. But here I was, burning to death. I felt tears roll down my burnt cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mama," I gasped. The pain was so intense. I could smell my flesh burning. I heard something as I began to lose consciousness. There was shouting in the store. Someone was here. Did I set off the alarm? If so, I never heard it. Maybe it was a silent one like in the movies. I wanted to scream again, but I couldn't. All I knew was pain and the warm blanket of blackness that came over me. Monica. Monica tenderly touched her face as she stared at the huge red welt on her cheek. The pavement was hot when those black girls pushed her face down on it. Monica sighed deeply and let the tears fall freely down her honey-brown cheeks. These were not tears of pain. They were tears of frustration. She had felt helpless as they held her down and cut out chunks of her long, curly hair. I fucking hate them, Monica growled. She slammed her fist hard on the bathroom counter. She was going to have to wear a hat until her hair grew back. Monica sighed as she saw the huge bald spots on her. Those fucking animals, Monica said. She remembered the look of elation in their eyes as they held her hair. It was like a trophy or a prize to them. Some held it up to their heads, wondering how my long curly biracial hair would look on their disgusting black heads. I was going to do bad things to them. I knew I could not let this slide. I just wanted to live my life and move the hell out of the hood. I wanted to do so many things, but the hood and the ignorant, knuckle-dragging cave dwellers that infested it would always hold me back. It's hard to focus and succeed when you always have to look over your shoulder. When you can't even breathe because black people felt some type of way about me being half white. I had come to the conclusion that I would never be black enough for them, nor did I care to be. I came from a white womb. I was half white, yet I was not white, nor was I black. I was something in between, a mixture of both, yet not either of them. I sighed again as I pulled the thick beanie over my head. I had so many bald patches where they cut out my hair that I could not hide it outside of wearing this beanie. It was a hot day, and I knew I would look foolish wearing it, but it would be less foolish than bold and blatant bald patches. I wanted to hurt those black girls badly. I didn't know what I could inflict on them that was equal to what they had done to me. They took my pride and dignity. They beat me because they did not like my race. They were my oppressors. But of course no one would see it that way. I was half black, so therefore considered just black. No matter what black people do to me because of my racial mixture or in the name of colorism, it would never be seen as racism. It was just black on black bullying. Something had to be done about this. I knew I was not the only biracial girl who has endured this from these jealous black bitches. Beating them up one by one would do nothing. All they knew was violence. They would walk it off and come back at me later. I had to do something that would make them feel the lasting pain that they made me feel. Then it hit me. I remembered one of the girls was pregnant. I smiled coldly into the mirror. My reflection chilled me. I did not recognize the cold, bitter mixed girl that smiled back at me. But something had to be done. A statement had to be made. I would take her child from her. I would consider it a blessing for that child and the world. Who would want to be raised by a single black bitch in the hood? If the child was a boy, it would grow up to terrorize someone or rape a mixed girl. I knew all too well the lust and aggressive advances that black men and boys had for girls who looked like me. Yeah, I would be doing the world a favor. That bitch who attacked me would forever remember the pain and trauma she inflicted on me. My pain would be attached to her loss. I sighed and splashed water on my face. I was going to do this today. I would get her alone and kill her child. I walked out of the bathroom and ate a quick breakfast. My father had already left for work. I didn't see him much during the week. He worked hard to make sure I had everything I ever needed. My father was a blessing in my life. He was the reason I didn't hate the entire black race. He was proof to me that there could be good, hard-working, regular black men. He was honorable. I knew he was lonely, and he struggled a lot to provide for me. He sacrificed his dating life to focus on me. I could never repay my father for all he has done for me. All I could do is be better than the trash we lived around. I left my house and started to trek to school. It was quiet in the morning. Most were still in bed because they did not work. They lived off welfare. Off of hard-working men like my father. The ghetto should be kissing the feet of the rest of society that supported them. But no, they murder each other and leave their little slice of society in a shambled ruin. I arrived at my school sooner than I thought. I don't even remember walking the miles to get there. I was so lost in my mind and what I would do today. I get like that sometimes. I live in my mind, and time just seems to escape. My school was as run down as the ghetto that surrounded it. It was no small wonder that the education we received here was far below that of a middle-class neighborhood. Our textbooks were far outdated. Schools are funded by property tax of the neighborhood. The ghetto was mostly projects and condemned houses. There was no wealth here and no opportunity to grow wealth. It was no small wonder why education was mocked by the black folks who lived there. People like myself who loved education were not challenged. The education was too easy for us. It set us up to fail. The best and brightest of us in the hood were only average in a normally funded school. It's disgusting how bad the education in poor project areas are. I skipped all of my classes and followed that black pregnant bitch around. She was pretty, and boys seemed to drool over her. I mean, what boy wouldn't? She was their same age and clearly sexually active. She was a teenager and pregnant. Boys were driven by their hormones. It took the entire school day to finally find her alone in the girls' bathroom. She was pregnant after all. The bathroom was a place she frequented. I went in behind her and locked the door after looking around to ensure no one was in there. She was in the last stall. My heart began to race in my chest. I was actually going to do this. I was going to make one of them suffer the way they made me suffer. I took off the beanie that covered my head and hid all of my bald spots. Flashes of the black girls holding me down while the older black woman cut out chunks of my hair. I touched the burned and bruised parts of my face. I could feel the rage bubbling inside of me. I remembered this pregnant bitch standing by and laughing at my torture and misery. Silent tears of rage fell down my honey-brown cheeks. I slowly walked to the stall the pregnant black bitch was in. I knocked on it. "I'm almost done," I heard her say. I smiled and pushed the stall door open. "What the fuck, bitch?" the girl shouted. She looked up at me. I was amused by how her face changed from anger to terror. She was sitting on the toilet still. Her huge pregnant belly was all the more apparent. She looked at my bruised and burnt face, and then at the massive bald patches on my head. I'm sorry," she said. She knew something was going to happen to her. She could not defend herself against me. "Are you afraid of the white bitch you beat and stole her hair?" I mocked. "Please. That was them," the pregnant girl responded. She was right. She didn't touch me, but she stood there and laughed as they beat me. She egged them on as they cut out my hair. She mocked me as my face burned against the hot pavement. Her words and laughter stung just as much as the blows. They burned me just as much as the hot pavement on my face. She would get no mercy from me. I reached down and grabbed a handful of her thick, greasy, nappy hair and pulled her up roughly by it. She swung at me. I easily dodged it and punched her hard in her stomach. She looked at me in pain and shock. It registered in her mind, for the first time, that I did not come here for her. I hit her in the stomach again. She started to scream in pain. "Not my baby, please," she begged. I rammed her black head into the tiles on the bathroom wall. She gasped in pain and fell hard to the floor. I kicked her in her stomach as hard as I could, and as many times as I could, before I lost my breath. For some reason, I didn't feel good doing this to her. I felt horrible, but I couldn't stop now. This was not just about me. This was for all the biracial girls who were beaten and bullied by black girls for no other reason than being half white. I kicked her a few more times and pulled out a pair of scissors from my backpack. The look of sheer terror on the girl's face was startling. She probably thought I was going to kill her with it. She is getting a glimpse of the helplessness I felt when they did what they did to me. I felt like I was going to die as well. Maybe they should have killed me. My rage would not be sated. I knelt beside her and saw blood soaking through her pants. I was not sure if I killed her bastard black baby, but I know I damaged her. She shook on the ground and looked pale. I grabbed a handful of her thick, nappy hair and cut as much of it as I could off. I was careful to leave huge bald patches in her hair. "You did this. Remember that as you bury your bastard child," I said. I was surprised by the anger and hate in my voice. I stood and put the beanie back on my head. I was going to kick her again in her stomach. She looked up at me pleadingly. Please, I'm sorry. Please, no more, the black girl begged. I stared at her for a long moment, then crawled out the bathroom window and ran as fast as I could back home. I didn't go to any of my classes, and I was careful not to interact with anyone. As far as the school was concerned, I had ditched all day. There was so much violence and sex going on at the school that someone screaming in the bathroom would not cause any alarm. The school was just as ghetto as the people it claimed to educate. The teachers were born and raised in the same neighborhoods as the rest of us. My heart raced as I heard sirens. Sirens in the hood were a normal thing. It was part of the everyday routine in the hood. It would be strange if we went a day with no sirens, but this time it was different. I knew I had done something. I wondered if that pregnant black bitch had been discovered laying there bloody on the bathroom floor. Her hair was cut in various places. Had I killed her? She looked pale and sickly when I left her. The blood on her pants soaked through and was a deep red. I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted to take her baby from her, to make her feel as empty and helpless as she had made me feel. I fumbled to unlock my front door. I stripped and threw my clothes in the washing machine and hurried to shower. My body shook for some reason. Adrenaline was pulsing through me as I remembered kicking her in her stomach. I sighed and sat in the shower. I closed my eyes and let the hot water just hit me. Jordan. Wake up, nigga. I felt a sharp sting on my face. You fucking abomination, wake up. I felt the sting on my face again. I took a deep, shuddering breath and opened my eyes. Ah, there you are, nigga. I looked in the direction of the voice and saw a white police officer. I tried to move my hands, but they were cuffed behind my back. I wondered why he was calling me a nigger. I was of Aryan blood. I was white just like him. Did he not know the work I put in for the Brotherhood? The Aryans had many cops among them. They helped the Brotherhood in many ways, mostly by covering up their criminal activities. Though I applaud you for killing that nigger, the cop started. He stared at me for a long moment. You're not Aryan, and you never will be. You're a nigger. I'm gonna give you some advice, boy, the cop sighed. He seemed torn. He respected Jordan for the work he has put in on behalf of the Brotherhood. Yet, the fact remained, Jordan could never be an Aryan with his tainted blood. You're going to prison for a long time. They would try to get you for a hate crime. If they do, you will rot in a federal cell. You're half nigger. If I were you, I would claim that. They can't call a black man killing a black man a hate crime. The cop looked at me for a long moment. When you get to prison, don't claim the Brotherhood. No one on the outside cares about the work you put in. You're just a nigger in there. You hear me? The cop said. I nodded. The cop shook his head, as if he knew I would not give up on the Brotherhood so easily. What he said made sense, though. If I got hit with a hate crime, I would do life and maybe more. No one knows why I killed that nigga but me. I could just say he stole some money from me and I was trying to reclaim it when he attacked me. He was a nigger after all. He was bound to have a rap sheet. We were already at the county jail. The cop pulled me out of the back and walked me in. I felt strange. This was something I always wanted to avoid. I was being thrown into a pit, so to speak, with a bunch of niggas. I knew I would not fit in. The white power tattoos on me would make it even more difficult. Even if I didn't have the tattoos, I knew I would never fit into the black community. I was tan-skinned with blue eyes. I would never be black enough for them. But oddly enough, I was white enough to join the Brotherhood. Even if I was still treated like a mongrel. At least I was still accepted and protected. The Brotherhood was throwing me to the wolves. But could I blame them? I killed a nigger in a neighborhood that was known to be controlled by the Brotherhood. Most of all, the kill was unsanctioned. I was out of control, and my actions put the Brotherhood at risk. I had to be real with myself. I was no hero. Yes, killing the nigger earned me some respect, but an unsanctioned kill was just a murder. I was not upset with them for turning me in. Hell, in today's climate, you could barely raise your voice at a nigger without being called a racist. For a nigger to be murdered in a pro-white neighborhood was asking for Black Lives Matter to burn it down. I shook my head. My emotional reaction to that nigger calling me black almost started a race war. Despite all the talk, the Brotherhood was not ready for a race war. Our numbers were way down. hence me with my tainted blood being in the Brotherhood. I was booked for murder and various other charges, but I knew murder was the one they wanted to pin on me. I was classified as black, despite telling the white booking officer that I was white. He looked at my hair and features and said I could choose between black or Mexican. But there was no way I was white. I was angry, but didn't have time to think about it too much. I was thrown in a cell with a bunch of darker-skinned niggers. I was the only one in that cell that was like me, that was biracial. I found a spot in the corner and sat. They all stared at me. Their eyes were going over every inch of my body that was exposed. It seemed like they were rabid dogs looking for a weakness in the dog that was thrown in their pen. It seemed all of their eyes locked on a lightning bolt on my neck at once. I knew there was going to be trouble. My heart raced. I took slow breaths to calm myself. I was scared of these niggas. They were violent animals, and I was thrown into a cell full of them. "Hey nigga, what's that on your neck?" a black inmate asked. I acted like I didn't hear him. "Yeah, what is that shit?" another voice said. They all started to talk among themselves and point to my neck. "You hear me, nigga? What's that shit on your neck?" the black inmate shouted. He stood and stared at me. He started to clench his fist. I knew this would rapidly turn into violence. I was a brother of the Aryan nation. I was no coward. Even though I would lose, I would stand and face these inferior apes like the white man I was. I stood and turned to the black inmate that asked me the question. The entire cell hushed like they were anticipating the violence that was to come. "It means white power, you fucking monkey," I replied. I breathed rapidly. The room was so silent, I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. The adrenaline pumping through me was so intense, I felt like I was going to pass out. Then, out of nowhere, the inmates started to laugh. They pointed at me and laughed hysterically. "You must be mentally ill, nigga," an inmate said. He wiped tears from his eyes. "How are you a black white supremacist?" another inmate asked. "He's a real-life Clayton Bigsby," another said. They mockingly made the Heil Hitler salute towards me. I was furious, but I knew to escalate this would be foolish. I sat back down and stared at the dirty cell floor as they laughed louder and mocked me. "What are you in for, nigga?" a black inmate asked. The cell hushed up a bit. Many still laughed, but they did quietly. "Murder," I replied. Many of the black inmates shook their heads. To them, I was just a nut job, a black man pretending to be white. Maybe they were right. "When you get to the pen, you better drop that white boy shit," an older inmate said. He walked over to me and knelt before me. He seemed to have the respect of the other inmates. I didn't look up at him. I felt if I met his gaze, he would attack me like most wild animals. Those white boys in the pen won't accept you. If you go to them, the niggas won't accept you either. "It's not good to be alone in prison, youngster," the older black man said. Again, I didn't reply. This nigga didn't know what he was talking about. The Brotherhood anywhere would always accept me. I put in a lot of work for them. I was a brother. "Man, fuck that confused nigga OG. Let them white boys get his pale ass," an inmate shouted. "Yeah, fuck him," another black inmate agreed. The older black man they call OG raised his hand in the air, and they all shut up. He was a man with authority. He must have put in some work when he was on the streets. "Nah, he's just a little mixed up. My brother is biracial like him, and it's hard for mixed kids, especially if they are rejected by us," the OG said. He put his hand on my shoulder. I flinched. Every inmate in the cell stood up to protect the old black man that was talking to me. "Sit down. I could handle this youngster alone if he was dumb enough to try something," the OG said. "All right, OG," many of the black inmates said. Others just looked at me. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught that we are lost in the wilderness of America. That lostness is mental. Where we as his black brothers failed this biracial man, the white man did not. We left him out to dry like we do many of our biracial brothers, and the white man picked him up and turned him into a slave against his own people, the OG said. "Talk to him, brother," an inmate shouted. "Allah loves this black man as confused as he is." He was placed in a cell with us, of the nation, and not with the other lost brothers who would have not understood and murdered him, the OG said. He stared at me for a long moment. The other black inmates seemed to wait on his every word, like they felt empowered by him. We are freed slaves in our old master's lands. Just like on the plantation, there were slaves that lived in the big house and slaves that lived in the shacks in the field. The house slaves thought their life was good and felt they were better than those in the field. Oftentimes, the house slaves were used against us field slaves, not understanding that we are all slaves in the end, the OG said. He never took his piercing gaze off me. Even the house slaves got a nigga wake-up call. Prison will be this black man's wake-up call. No one from the black Muslims is to touch him. Put the word out. The OG said, "Yes, Minister Farouk." The black Muslims replied. Minister Farouk leaned over and whispered in my ear, "I know you're hard-hearted, so I'll extend you an olive branch. When we go to prison and the white devils have their way with your black ass, we will take you in if you submit to Allah." Minister Farouk squeezed my shoulder and left me in the corner. This dumb nigga and his nonsense, I thought to myself. The Aryans would never rape me. Homosexuality was against Aryan law. Most of all, I was not black. I was a proud white brother of the Aryan nation. My brothers in prison will know that. My time in county jail went quickly for me. The prosecutor sent me a deal of manslaughter. He made it clear that he did not want to deal with the political mess of a black white supremacist. If I went to trial testifying that I was an active member of the Aryan Brotherhood as part of a program to breed the black out of biracials, it would make national headlines. The prosecutor did not want that headache, and apparently neither did the judge. My silence meant more than the life of the nigger I killed. I don't know why, but for some reason it bothered me that his life meant so little in the eyes of the law. Minister Farouk was relentless in his efforts to get me to accept the wisdom of the man Elijah Muhammad. He called him a prophet for the black man. What was amusing was they taught the same thing the Aryans taught, just in a way that favored them. To them, whites were inferior. They believed they were created from bird shit in a secret lab. That white men were cursed by God, hence their pale skin and blue eyes. The Aryans taught that blacks were cursed by God, hence their black skin. That they were beasts created to serve the devil. It seemed I was torn between a white race cult or a black one. Minister Farouk pled guilty to his charge of aggravated assault and was shipped to the state prison. He, like most niggas, blamed the white man for them being there. He said a white man tried to burn down his black masjid and he beat him within an inch of his life. I doubted that was true. The Aryans did not stray from their drug activity. They wanted to make money and increase their numbers. Bringing attention to themselves by attacking a black place of worship was not the kind of attention they wanted. If it did happen, it was probably a lowly redneck who was fed up with uppity niggers in his neighborhood. With Minister Farouk gone, I felt even more alone. The black Muslims that were still here left me alone. They put the word out that if any touched me, the Muslims would deal with them. Matthews, number 374-10086, roll up, you're shipping out. A corrections officer yelled. I guess it was my time to go to prison. I had 4 years to do, and I wanted desperately to see my Aryan brothers. Oreo Boy. I awoke to the steady beat of a heart monitor. My eyes fluttered open, and my entire body felt like it was on fire. I remembered what had happened. I was burning alive in the tanning bed. Was this death? Was I in hell? I didn't think I was a bad kid, but even if I was not dead, I was in a living hell. I always have been in one. Being stuck in a skin you hate, wishing you were someone else. I wanted to scream, but all that escaped my lungs was a painful, hollow wheeze. The heart monitor sounded like a loud alarm. It made my head throb even more. I wanted to cradle my throbbing head in my hands, but I could not. My arms wouldn't move. I could feel that they were there, but they felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. My entire body felt that way. I tried to move my head and looked to see if my hands were there. A wave of terror and pain shot through me. I couldn't move my head. Mom! I tried to speak. I could hear my voice in my head, but I don't think I was able to make a physical sound. People rushed into my room. I could hear them talking, but they seemed far away. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like it was going to explode. My chest heaved. "He is awake!" I heard the familiar voice of my mother shout. The fear and anxiety in her voice was very apparent. "What's wrong, Mom?" I tried to say. My lips moved, but no sound escaped me. I could hardly breathe. I wanted to see my mother's face. I knew something was wrong with me. I just didn't understand what yet. I never truly appreciated my mother until I was here, and I needed her. I felt bad for that. I wanted to cry. Maybe I did. I just couldn't see or feel it. I was me, Oreo Boy, the half-white kid who seemed imprisoned in my own body. I couldn't move. This shell that held me seemed in pain and distressed. I was like an inmate looking through the bars of his prison. My bars were my eyes. Like the inmate, I could see everything outside, but could do nothing. "He's going into shock," I heard a woman shout. "My baby!" My mother screamed. "Mama!" I tried to call out to her. My body felt warm, and I felt that familiar darkness creeping up on me. I regretted every moment that I hated my mother for being white. I just wanted to be wrapped in her loving arms. I never wanted to admit it, but her arms were the only place I felt loved and accepted. As soon as I left them, I was back to not being black enough, to being Oreo Boy. I didn't fit in anywhere. Like a fool, I blamed the only person who loved me for my pain. I think my soul was weeping. I knew my body couldn't. I have never wept like this before. My entire being rocked with the force of my pain. "Now you show up, Jacob," my mother said. I could hear the anger and blame in her voice. Jacob was my father's name. Was he here? Was I finally black enough for him? I hoped the tanning bed had worked, and I was no longer biracial. I figured I would look like my father. My mother always told me I was a light-skinned version of him. "Don't act like I don't love my boy. You made it damn near impossible for me to see him," Jacob replied. I wondered what my father was talking about. My mother always said she wished I had a better relationship with my father. "I can't teach him how to be a black man, Jacob. He did this because he wanted to be more like you," my mother said. Her voice dripped with pain and regret. I wish I could speak. I hated that I just seemed stuck in my body. I could hear everything and see through what seemed like old blurry lenses. But I could do nothing. I can't help him with that either. He is not black. Well, at least not like me. He came from a white womb. He would never be seen in the same light as me, Jacob replied. So it was true. I was not black enough for my father. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit my father, but I blacked out again. I would awake for a few moments and hear people talking around me or listen to my mom weep. She was the only one that was there. My father never came back. Even now, after the tanning bed, I was not black enough for him. I came from the womb of a white woman. He would never accept me. Well, fuck him and all black people. I didn't want to be like them anymore. The person who loved me and accepted me unconditionally was white. I was wrong for hating her all these years. I wish I could tell her this. I stayed in the hospital for months. The feeling in my limbs slowly came back. My body had been wrapped in gauze. My entire body was badly burnt. My skin seemed to have melted off my bones. I was a monster. I was not biracial or even black anymore. I was just a disfigured and horribly scarred monster. I could see how bad I looked in my mother's eyes. If it was hard for her to love me like this, I knew I was truly alone. As much as I wanted to blame my mother for this, I knew I couldn't. She was in love with my father and made me out of that love. My father was in love with my mother's white skin. It seemed he hated the skin he was in just as much as I did. Every time he looked at me, he didn't see me. He saw what he could never be. Here I was this entire time looking up to my father and wanting to be as black as him. All he ever wanted was to be as light as me. He hated his skin just as much as I hated mine. Like father, like son, I guess. But here I am now, this burnt monster. The day they took the gauze off me and I saw myself for the first time, I could not breathe or speak. I wanted to scream, but I held it in. I was definitely darker, but it was a nightmare. I looked like something that lurked under kids' beds. I knew then that I could not live like this. I made a subconscious decision to end my life. My mind already knew I would do it. My heart just had not accepted it yet. I needed to die. I could not be this creature. In my struggle to be accepted, I isolated myself further. I blamed the black community for this. I blamed the black kids who burned my skin and beat me because I was not black enough. I hated them for what they have turned me into. It's not right that my life will end, and they get away with what they have done to me. I had a plan. They would all pay, and I would die. I would make my final stand as the monster I am, as the monster they created. They hated me for how I was born. I hated them for what they made me become. They had killed me long ago. I had just refused to die then. I was a walking corpse, trying desperately to bring life into this biracial body that everyone hated. But no longer would I be the living dead. I had to put this corpse that was my body where it belonged. I had to put it in the ground. I likened myself to a quote of Malcolm X's. I saw myself as the hate that hate created. I was a monster created by other monsters. After months in the hospital and physical therapy, I was released. My father never came back. The day I was wheeled to the front door and helped into my mother's car, my father was nowhere to be seen. I guess he had another reason to be ashamed of me. I would never be black enough for him, and now I was a burnt monster. But I have come to peace with my father's hate for me. He would pay too. He would suffer just as I had to suffer. All I ever wanted was his love. If he had accepted me, it would have made the rejection from the rest of the world bearable. He was the only black man that mattered in my life. His opinion weighed more than that of all the black people in the world. He hated me as much as the black kids that bullied me. I cried in the backseat of my mother's car as she drove me home. All I had was her, and even she could not look at me the way she used to. I know she didn't mean it, but she would stare at me, then quickly turn away as if disgusted by my burnt skin. I was a monster even to my mother. Did she still love me? Or did she care for me because she had to? I understood if she didn't love me anymore. I mean, how could she love a monster? A walking corpse. I would spare my mother. I didn't want to hurt her any more than I already have. She was in love with a black man who didn't love her, and was stuck with a biracial child who hated himself. And for most of his life, he hated her for being white. I would miss my mother. I never thought I would. It took me being at the end of my short life to understand that she has been my rock. She was the only anchor I had to sanity. When I needed love and acceptance, she was always there with open arms. But like the rest of the world, she would be better off without me. I stared out the window as we drove home. The world seemed more vivid, like it was more alive. It seemed so bright and colorful. I didn't know if it was the pain medication, or I was on my soul's last attempt to show me how beautiful the world was. "I love you, Mama," I said. As we pulled into our driveway, my mother stopped the car and placed her head on the steering wheel. She started to sob. This was going to be hard for her. I can't act like she has not suffered by having me. Her parents were from the deep south of Mississippi. They had called her a nigger lover and disowned her. Her family was wealthy. They cut her off. The man she loved and gave it all up for abandoned her, and now I was a burnt monster. Maybe when I'm gone, her family will take her back. She would not have to work 2 jobs and be so alone. I was a biracial stain on her life. My mom chose love over her family. The man she loved only lusted after her white skin. After he had gotten his fill, he left her, not caring what she had given up for him and me. But I would make this right for her and me. My mother had a gun that she didn't know I knew about. She kept it in a shoebox in her closet. My father would pay for breaking both of our hearts, and the black kids at school would pay for their colorist hate. My mother took several deep breaths and closed her eyes for a moment. She calmed herself. "I love you too, son," she said. She turned and looked at me. She really looked at me. For the first time since this happened, I didn't see the disgust for my burnt and ravaged skin. I saw love there. She loved and adored me no matter what I looked like. "I'm sorry, Mama," I said. My voice cracked with emotion. My mother couldn't help but cry again. She thought I was apologizing for what I did to myself. I was apologizing for the pain I would soon bring her. I knew me dying would break her heart, but it would also set her free of the half-black stain that was me. Monica. I paced around my room. I couldn't believe what I had just done. I was angry like I have never been before. I felt like years of being bullied by the black girls finally erupted. The truly alarming thing was I felt good about it. I felt like a hero who made the villain finally pay. I forced accountability on a community that always seemed to avoid it. I felt exhilarated. I didn't care if that girl's child lived or died. I knew she would always remember me, just like I would always remember what she and her friends have done to me. Their abuse and ugly black faces as they attacked me were seared into my mind. Even now, my blood boiled as I thought of them cutting my hair off. I pulled off my beanie and felt the bald spots on my head. They would all feel my wrath. I would get even with all of them on behalf of every biracial girl out there. They deserved what was coming to them. I was a superhero, and they were the villain. I knew where the main girl and her mom lived. My mind flashed to that older black woman cutting my hair with her dull knife. The look of triumph on her face made my chest heave. I felt anxious thinking about it. They acted like cutting my long curly hair was vindication for the slight of me being half white and them a dark nappy black. I felt a hate in my gut for black people, for black boys and men that made me feel like a piece of meat every time they saw me, how they aggressively touched and grabbed me. I feared it was only a matter of time before one of them raped me. Ghetto black men were just as much of a plague on humanity as ghetto black girls. I felt they all needed to be exterminated. I hated them for hating me and not allowing me to live my life with my father in peace. My mother was not perfect. She was an ex-hoe when my father met her. She was turned out by a black man who got her addicted to drugs and put her on a street corner. I don't know what my father saw in a street hoe, but he loved her. Maybe he too was not exempt from the colorism that plagued the black community. Or maybe he didn't want to have a kid that was doomed to be just another hood rat. Another idiot who blamed the wreckage of their lives on white men instead of their own actions or failure to act. I sighed deeply, thanking God that I was half white. Even though my mother was a crack-addicted hoe, the white blood I got from her canceled out a lot of the nonsense from the black side. I changed into some baggy sweatpants and a hoodie. I walked to my garage. My father had a gas can there. He always kept it full just in case. My father was somewhat of a prepper. He kept generators and cans of gas ready in case the power went out. He often forgot that we lived in the hood around some rabid animals. If the power went out and our house was the one spot with power, the roaches that called themselves humans would flock here and try to rob us. I loved my father. He is the greatest man I have ever known, but he was often naive about the destructive nature of his own people. Maybe his blackness blocked him from seeing how dangerous black people were. I found a smaller gas can that was full. My father kept matches in a drawer next to the gas cans. He liked to know exactly where everything was at in case of emergency. He was tedious like that. He prided himself on always being prepared. And part of being prepared was being able to easily access things he needed. He was extremely annoying about it, but the upside was I always knew where everything was. The house of the older black woman and her daughter was a few miles away from my house. They lived in a duplex in the middle of the worst part of the hood. All the houses around them were condemned and boarded up. Parts of their house were boarded up as well. It seemed like it would not be long until the city condemned their home as well, if they have not already. I waited until the sun went down and walked to their ruined shack of a duplex. It took me nearly 2 hours to walk there. My face was covered by the hoodie, and I walked with my head down. I didn't want anyone to recognize me. I was several shades lighter than everyone who lived here. It seemed like the darker skinned you were, the deeper in poverty you lived. It's crazy that there was a class system here in the hood. My father was poor, but considered hood rich, whatever the hell that meant. Because he was not as poor as most of the people who dwelt there, he was considered a coon. They claimed he was trying to act white. It's sad how having an education and working hard makes you a traitor to your race if you're black. I recognized the old barely working vehicle parked in front of their duplex. The townhome attached to their home was boarded up and condemned, so burning down their house would hurt nobody else but them. But even if it did displace another black family, so what? These people were horrible monsters and deserved whatever they got. I stood in front of the house. The gas can was in my backpack, and the matches were in my pocket. My heart raced, but I was not scared. I felt like I was getting justice. You can't just beat, bully, and oppress someone for their skin tone and not expect payback. But these arrogant black bastards thought they got away with what they did to me. I heard screaming and cussing in their house. I figured their home would be as dysfunctional as they were. "Fuck you, Marcus. You're always talking to that bitch," a woman screamed. I heard something break. I figured she had thrown something at him. "Why do you always have to do this in front of the kids?" Marcus responded. This was the perfect distraction for me to set their dump of a life on fire. I crept up beside their house. The screaming and fighting got louder. "That's why you've been taking care of DeMondre's kids, nigga," the woman shouted. There was an eerie silence that came over the house. It seemed that all knew she had stepped over a line she could not undo. I poured gasoline on the side of their house. The house was so old and rotted, it would go up like a tinderbox even without the gasoline. "What?" the man screamed. I heard a sharp, meaty slap, and the woman screamed in pain. No wonder why black kids were so fucked up. This was the reality for most of them. Their mother was a hoe, sleeping with any black man that could help her pay a bill. The men didn't know if the kids they loved and were raising were even theirs. I was glad my father did not marry a black woman. I mean, my mom was no saint, but she had me and gave me to my father, knowing she could do nothing for me. Even at my mother's worst, she did what she knew was best for me. That was not being in my life at all and letting my father raise me. I poured gas all around the house and on their front porch. My heart was beating so fast I felt sick. I felt like I would throw up. "You got this, Monica," I whispered. I lit the first match and threw it on the front porch. I waited a moment to see if it lit. I smiled as the flames sprang to life on the front porch and caught fire. I ran to the side of the house and lit the gas on all sides. Then ran back to the middle of the street. I put my gas can back into my backpack and watched as the flames danced around the house. The flames seemed eager to consume the old, rotted wood. I heard screams from inside the house. I wanted them all to burn. They deserved no less for what they did to me. I put my hand under my hoodie and felt the bald spots on my head. "The porch is on fire! Get the kids!" Marcus shouted. It was more than just the porch, but I figured he would find that out soon enough. I could hear the woman sobbing as she realized her entire shitty life would burn. One of the girls was staring at me from the upstairs window. The smoke was thick. She coughed. I locked eyes with her and smiled. She was one of those black bitches that jumped me and held me down so their vile mother could cut my hair. I wanted to say something. I wanted to let them know that it was me that ruined their life. I held my tongue. I knew if I said something, my father would suffer. They would shoot up my house. "Hey, you!" a voice shouted. I turned to see that older black woman who had cut my hair. She was behind the house motioning me to her. "Help me, please! I can't carry all of my babies!" The black woman pleaded. I nodded and ran over to her. She didn't know who I was and clearly didn't think I set her house on fire. She was breathing hard and sobbing. "Please help me! My babies are still in there!" The woman pleaded. Her pain and misery fed my rage. The fire of hate in me burned hotter than the fire that consumed her house. I pulled my hoodie off my head and locked eyes with the woman. She stared at me a moment. It took her a minute to register who I was. She saw the bald spots on my head and gasped. Before she could react, I pushed her as hard as I could into the flames that were quickly consuming the house. She screamed as she fell hard on her back in the fire. I covered my head again with my hoodie and watched as she screamed and stood. She threw herself on the grass and rolled around. "You will never hurt a biracial girl again," I shouted. The smell of her burning flesh gagged me. Her screams of pain were deafening. Her kids watched and cried as their mother frantically tried to put out the flames that burned her out. I ran. I didn't know if she would live or die, but I knew she would never be the same. Not only was she black, she was now burnt, and her kids were homeless. Hopefully, they would be motherless as well. I ran as hard as I could. My body was fueled by fear and adrenaline. I covered the several miles back to my father's house in half the time. As soon as I got home, I took my clothes off and threw them in the wash. I took a long shower. The screams of pain in that black woman's voice would not stop ringing in my ears. I started to cry. I don't know why I was crying. Maybe it was the last shred of innocence in me dying. Maybe it was my soul weeping at the monster I had become. "Baby girl, are you home?" my father shouted. I sighed as I heard his voice. I had to pull myself together. My father was my rock. He was my anchor on this violent sea I had found myself on. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm in the shower, Daddy," I replied. I heard my father walk to the bathroom door. "Sorry I'm late, baby. I got us a late dinner, and I got some great news," my father said. He seemed happy. This was rare for my father. He worked hard and was always tired. But tonight, his voice seemed to have a pep in it that I have not heard before. I hurried up and finished showering. I threw on my pajamas and came to the kitchen. I had my towel wrapped around my head to hide the bald spots. My father smiled broadly and hugged me. "Come sit down and eat," my father said. He pulled out the chair for me. He always told me that if a man can't open a door for you or pull out your chair, he is not worthy of my time. He went out of his way to show me how I should be treated. I adored my father. He took such joy in raising me. I could tell my father was excited. "So, I'm selling the house. I got a job that pays much more, and we're moving next week out of this stinking hood," my father said. Tears welled up in his eyes. This meant a lot to him. He owned this house, but he hated the hood just as much as I did. All he wanted to do was give me a better life. I knew if I got caught with the things I have done, it would break his heart. He would have lost his only daughter to the hood and the system he hated so much and worked so hard to escape from. I smiled. I was relieved. If I could lay low, I could escape all of this. I could wake up from this nightmare and restart out of the hell that was the hood. "I love you, Daddy," was all I could manage to say. Jordan. The bus ride to the state prison was a long one for me. Most of the inmates on the bus were excited to finally leave the dregs of the county jail and get settled into their more permanent lifestyle and routine. Most of these men were repeat offenders. I was scared, not only because this was my first time, but these men did not have my dilemma. They did not have to worry about where they fit in. In my heart, I was an Aryan. and I would seek out the Aryan brothers in this space. But I could not deny the taint of nigger blood that ran through my veins. This would be difficult for me if the Aryans did not accept me. I could not see myself surrounded by a bunch of niggas for the next several years. "Hey!" a voice said from behind me. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned expecting to fight, but saw a bald-headed white man. He was an Aryan. "You that black Aryan? The one that's in for killing a nigger?" the white man said. He said it loud enough for those surrounding me to hear. Many of the black inmates turned and looked at me. I knew something was up. An Aryan brother would never refer to me as a black Aryan. That was an insult to the Aryan blood. "Not black, just an Aryan," I said sternly. The white man turned to the niggas sitting around me. "You hear that, boys? He's not black," the white man mocked. I was not sure what just transpired, but the niggas glared at me for the entirety of the bus ride to the prison. I knew I would have to fight sooner than later. As soon as we arrived at the prison, I was classified and sent to a unit. They classified me as black and sent me to a predominantly black unit. The guards laughed when I told them I was white. I don't see the issue with me wanting to be white. My mother was white. I grew up white. I was part of the Aryan Brotherhood. Every time I told the guards this, and I was mocked. I would hush all that up quickly. As soon as I could, I sought out the leader of the Aryans. It was not hard to find him. He was tall, white, very well built, and had the same tattoos I had. White brothers surrounded him and waited on his every word. He was in the yard working out. I did not know this then, but the yard was by far the most dangerous place in the entire prison. This was where business was done, and wars were started. Each race had their own part of the yard, and took turns with the weights. Word had gotten around about me before I even stepped into the yard. All the races stared at me. The niggas glared at me. I saw Minister Farouk in the corner with a large number of nigger Muslims. His group was by far the biggest. He shook his head at me. I shrugged and looked for the Aryans. They were on the weights. I started to walk over to them. The brothers that stood watch leaned down and whispered something into their leader's ear, who was bench pressing. I heard him laugh and watched as he sat up and locked eyes with me. I tried to read his eyes, but all I could see was the cold lifelessness of someone who has given up. He was probably a lifer and had been in prison for many years already. He would die here, and he had accepted that. That fact alone made this man dangerous. There was nothing they could do to this man. He was not afraid of any other punishment. He could murder me in front of everyone and think nothing of it. He had nothing to lose. He nodded at the brothers guarding him as I approached. They glared at me and stepped aside. "So, you're the half nigger in the breeding program, huh?" the Aryan leader asked. "I am," I responded. Immediately felt a sharp blow to my gut. I doubled over and struggled to breathe. The Aryans laughed at me. "When speaking to our leader, the first and last words out of your nigger-tainted mouth is 'Yes, brother master,'" one of the Aryan guards growled at me. I noticed the Aryan leader eyed the black Muslims. He was very aware of his surroundings and didn't seem to miss a thing. I regained my breath and stood up. "Yes, brother master," I replied. The Aryan leader smiled at me. "We have our own breeding program here for the tainted ones," the Aryan leader said. I smiled. I could still be of use to the Brotherhood. I could still be a part of them. I didn't have to grovel to niggers. The Aryan leader nodded to two of the Aryan guards, and they grabbed me roughly. I didn't fight or resist. These were my brothers, and I was being accepted. The correctional officers saw the Aryans grab me and turned their heads. It seemed the Aryans had some power in here, or the inmates had an understanding with the guards. They dragged me into the Aryan leader's cell and stood by the door so I could not leave. My heart raced. I wondered if the Aryan master had a mission for me. I didn't have to wait long for the Aryan leader to appear. He walked in and smiled at me. He was a huge man. I was tall, but he towered over me. He looked like a demon with his blue eyes on the backdrop of his pale flesh. He smiled wickedly at me. "First off, Taint, I heard about the nigger you killed. I applaud your work," the Aryan leader said. He took off his shirt and started to take off his pants. I nodded at the appreciation of my work. But this is prison, and facts remain you're a nigger, and we can't have even half niggers among our ranks, the Aryan leader said. I nodded and was getting ready to go, but the Aryan leader held his arms up. Since you were dumb enough to think your tainted self could be part of us in prison, I have to make an example of you, the Aryan leader said. He smiled as he saw it come together in my eyes. He was going to rape me. I swung on him. I hit him as hard as I could in his face. He staggered back. As I went to strike him again, I was hit hard. It felt like the side of my head was going to explode. I was dazed and hit again several more times. The Aryan leader laughed. Too bad you're a taint. You definitely have some balls, the Aryan leader said. His 2 guards held me down and ripped my prison pants from me. Hand me the knife, the Aryan leader commanded. Were they going to kill me? My Aryan family that I put so much work in for. I'm doing time for killing a nigger in our neighborhood. I can't die like this. I struggled as hard as I could. They hit me in the back of my head several times. Buck down, boy. I'm not going to fuck you yet, the Aryan leader mocked. I was on the verge of blacking out. I can't have a taint running around here with our marks on them, the Aryan leader said. He put the knife to my neck and started to cut the flesh that held the lightning bolt tattoos on them. I screamed in pain as he cut deep. Hot blood dripped on his cell floor. Damn it, I'm going to have to give some good Aryan the horrible task of cleaning your tainted blood from my floor, the Aryan leader said. He nodded to one of his guards, and they hit me several more times in my face. My body slumped. Now to the ones on your back, the Aryan leader mocked. He set a strip of my bloody tan flesh on the floor. He was careful to put it directly in my eyesight. Having a taint running around here claiming us weakens us. On the street, the breeding program is needed. And here, you're just another nigger, the Aryan leader said. I could feel my hot blood dripping from my neck. Hot pain seared through me as he sliced into my back. I had swastikas tattooed there. It was a rather huge one. I might die from this. I must have blacked out again. I felt a sharp sting on my face as the Aryan leader slapped me hard. Look at my work, taint, the Aryan leader said. There were huge slabs of my skin on the floor. I could see the tattoos of the Brotherhood on them. Now I'm gonna rape you. I want you to feel every inch of this, the Aryan leader said. His guards hit me several more times. I was on the verge of blacking out again. They held my face down and watched as their leader rammed himself inside of me. I wanted to scream, but I could barely breathe. My butt felt like it was on fire. You feel that, taint? You're being blessed with real Aryan meat, the Aryan leader mocked. He took his finger and jabbed it into one of the huge wounds on my back, one of the places where he cut the Aryan tattoos from my flesh. Pain seared through me, and I finally felt the mercy of passing out. I woke alone and in pain. I was hoping all that had happened was just a bad dream, a nightmare that I had finally woken up from. But as soon as I took my first deep breath, I knew it wasn't. My face was bruised and swollen. My back and butt were bandaged. I was dizzy with pain. Praise Allah, brother. I slowly turned to see Minister Farouk sitting next to me. I don't know why, but seeing him made me weep. He looked like an angel praying for the souls of the dying. I was a soul he thought he could redeem. It is often when we are at our worst point in life that we notice Allah. You have fallen, and Allah has caught you. Will you accept His mercy, brother? Minister Farouk said. He held my hand tenderly, like he was a concerned father. I couldn't speak even if I wanted to. My face was too beaten and swollen. My whole world had been turned upside down. I didn't know who I was anymore. I was laid bare. The tattoos of my former life were carved off me. I knew I could no longer claim to be Aryan. I wouldn't now, even if I could. I didn't know who I was. I had built my life around being white and being an Aryan brother. Now that was stripped from me as well. I nodded at Farouk, and he smiled. I know you can't talk, but Allah is with you. He broke you down so you would hear him. From this day forward, brother, you will never be alone. Minister Farouk patted my hand and left. I fell back asleep shortly after he did. I felt like a newborn who was discovering the world for the first time. I could see things outside of the hateful lens of the Brotherhood. The world was brand new. I didn't believe in Minister Farouk's God, but I was thankful to him for helping me love and embrace who I actually am. I am a biracial man, and there's nothing wrong with that. Oreo Boy. I didn't get much sleep that night. I wanted to savor every last minute I had. I knew that today would be my last day among the living. Today would be a big day for me. I would get revenge and the peace I have longed for my entire short life. I lay in bed and watched the night turn to day. I think I may have dozed off a few times. I made sure to catch the sunrise. This would be the last one I would ever see. I had never truly taken the time to marvel at the beauty of it. The sunrise was a promise of a new start, that each day would be different than the next. It was a sign from God that the sun will set on the problems of yesterday and rise the next day with the hope of making today better. Sadly, God forgot me in that promise. I was not supposed to be back at school yet. I was still healing. I had a ton of medication to take daily to help stave off infection and lessen the pain. It still hurt to move and breathe, but I could not wait anymore. My mother had left for work. She assumed I would stay in my bed and play my Xbox. I dressed in clothes that hid as much of my body as I could. I didn't want anyone to see how burned I was. I don't know why my heart raced as I found the gun in my mother's shoebox. It was a black Glock. She had several full clips. I stuffed them in all my pockets. I tucked the gun into my waistband and covered it with my hoodie. My father's house was not far away. His house was closer to my school than mine. I stopped and wrote my mother a letter. I would never see her again, and she would never understand. I wanted her to know that this was not about her. I wanted her to know how much I loved her. I hoped she could get over me and find love again. In the letter, I begged her not to get with another black man and create another biracial. She has no idea about the pain and struggle that comes with not being enough. The tears swelled and rolled down my burnt cheeks as I folded the letter and set it on the table. I wrote Mom on it in really big letters. I didn't want her to miss it when she came home. I looked around the kitchen one last time. I was going to miss my mother and little home. It had just been me and her for so long. Farewell, Mother, I whispered. I stopped and kissed the letter. I could still turn away. I could get back in my bed and play my Xbox. But that would not help the pain in me. That would not change the fact that I'm burnt and biracial. No, I couldn't do this anymore. My father had to pay for what he did to me and my mother. It took all of my strength to walk out of my door. Honestly, that was the hardest part of all of this. I knew once my door closed behind me, there was no going back. The door closed behind me, and I stepped into the chill morning air. School didn't start for a couple of hours still. I timed it so I would have time to walk to my father's house. I knew the exact distance. I can't recount the amount of times I snuck out of my mother's house in the middle of the night and sat on my father's front porch. I would imagine that I lived there, that he loved me, and I was black like him and his other kids. I would sit there for hours. I could never get the courage to knock on the door. I sighed as I thought about how different my life would have been if my father had just loved me. Ah, fuck, I whispered, as hot tears stung my burnt cheeks. I pulled my hoodie tightly over my head. I wanted to hide my face and who I was as best as I could. I started the hour walk to my father's house. I may not have had the strength to knock on his door before, but I knew I would now. The time had passed for him to accept me. I no longer cared for his acceptance. That part of me died in that tanning booth. Knocking on his door was as cold and empty as a freshly dug grave. It had an entirely different meaning to me now. I was there to take him from this world. I wanted him to look me in my burnt face and understand that he played a part in this. It was painful walking this much. My clothes brushed painfully against my still healing flesh, but I pushed forward. This would be the last day I felt that pain. The last day that I was not enough for anyone. By the time I stood in front of my father's house, I was out of breath. I doubled over in pain. I was dizzy. I couldn't tell if it was the massive amount of adrenaline that pumped through my veins, or if I was still too weak from my burns. I sat on the sidewalk and studied his house as I waited for the dizziness and pain to subside. I noticed blood on my clothes. It had seeped out from all over my body. I was still far from healed. My flesh was extremely sensitive. My father had a nice house. It looked like the house that a loving family would live in. He kept the lawn trimmed and neat. I sighed. There was a time that I would have given anything to live here with him. After a few moments, I stood again and slowly walked to his door. I felt for the cold metal of the Glock tucked into my waistband. For some reason, it gave me strength. I was strangely calm as I stood in front of his door. I looked down at the spot I had sat long hours in. I could see myself sitting there, huddled in a blanket. I would stare lost into the sky, wishing I was asleep in his house. I wondered if my father snored. Damn, I whispered. As new tears rolled down my ravaged face, I painfully wiped them away and knocked hard on my father's door. Nothing happened. To think I was so afraid to just do this before. If I was being honest, I was afraid of him opening the door and telling me to go home. Did he know how badly I wanted his home to be my home? The thought of him rejecting me was what I was terrified of. I heard grumbling behind the door. I pulled out the Glock and put it in the pockets in front of my hoodie. The door slowly opened, and I saw my father's face looking out from the edge of the door. "What are you doing here?" my father asked. The look of surprise on his face when he first noticed me standing there was almost amusing. There was no love or concern in his voice for his burnt son, who stood before him in blood-stained clothes. He wanted to shoo me away like I was some unwanted pest. "I wanted to tell you goodbye, Father," I replied. My father frowned and stepped out in front of his door and closed it behind him. It was a chilly morning, and he was shirtless and in his boxers. He leaned forward until his face was inches from mine. "I thought I told you not to come around here," my father said sternly. I wrapped my burnt arms around him and hugged him. My father tensed, then sighed and hugged me back. I started to sob on my father's shoulder. He patted my back gently. "I always loved you, Daddy," I whispered to him. Before he could respond, I pulled the Glock from my hoodie and put it to his ear. He tensed as he felt the cold steel. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. I wonder what he was thinking then. Did he regret not loving me? I would never know. I guess that's best. The answer to those questions would probably break my heart. I pulled the trigger. It all seemed to unfold in slow motion for me. I didn't even feel like myself. I felt like I was watching from a distance as the gunshot pierced the silence of the morning. I watched as my father's eyes went wide as the bullet went through his head and exploded out the other side. I heard screams from inside his house. I knew I should start running to the school, but I had to watch the light fade from his eyes. He locked eyes with me as his body started to twitch. I watched as his life's flame was extinguished. It flickered and went out like a candle flame that ran out of wick to burn. A cold chill went up my spine. I had done it. I had killed my father. Before I realized it, I was running as fast as I could towards my school. It was only a few blocks away from my father's house. For the first time since the tanning booth, I didn't feel pain. I felt good. I felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Now it was time to make the others pay for what they had done to me. If I could kill my father so easily, the black kids at school didn't stand a chance. I knew where they all hung out. They would not be hard to find. I made it to my school sooner than I thought I would. My entire body felt like it was burning in that tanning booth again. I stopped and stared at the school. Memories flooded my mind as I watched kids get dropped off and the school bus pull up. I sighed. I would not miss this school. The bullying in these halls was a thing that would haunt many people for the rest of their lives. I wondered what that black kid would say when he saw my burnt and scarred flesh. He once tried to give me an Indian burn to make my flesh darker. Would I be black enough for him now? I didn't notice until now that half of my hoodie was covered in blood. My father's blood. Bits of bone and brain stuck to it. I knew I reeked of death. I had to make this quick before someone started to notice the vast amount of blood that stained my clothes. I knew he would be at the basketball courts. He always came early to play a few games before class. I knew because I once tried to play with them. Haven't you heard? White boys can't jump. I remembered how he mocked me. I was not welcome anywhere with other black kids. That boy made my life at school hell. He made the pain of rejection all the more painful. He made it clear that I did not fit in and that I was not wanted anywhere. I was in so much pain that I could barely stand. I had come this far. I could not turn back now. I would kill all those boys and then myself. My pain would forever echo in the hallowed halls of this school. I hoped my actions would be an inspiration for other biracial kids to stand up and put an end to the bullying. I prayed my death would make adults think twice before they made us. It's not them who suffer. It's biracial boys and girls like myself who do. I made my way to the basketball courts. I smiled as I saw them all there. Sometimes being a creature of routine was a bad thing. Hey, niggas, I shouted. My voice was racked with pain and exhaustion, but the black boys heard me. I didn't want to call them that, but I needed to get their attention quickly. They turned and stared hard at me. I looked like a burnt monster covered in blood. What the fuck you just say? The black boy that had been bullying me replied. I stared hard at him and gripped the cold metal of the Glock that hid in my hoodie's front pockets. Am I black enough for you now, nigga? I replied. The boy stopped and stared hard at me. The boys with him stopped as well. Oreo Boy? The big black boy asked. I smiled, but he could not see it beneath my blood-stained hoodie. I just nodded. The expression on the boy's face softened. He looked sad and ashamed. Look, man, the black boy started. I was amused. This big black bully was sorry. He was sorry for his part in what I had become. I shook my head and limped closer to him. It's too late to be sorry, I whispered. Before he could respond, I pulled out the Glock and shot him several times in his chest. I emptied the clip on him. I had so much rage in me that I shot him more times than I intended to. Each bullet that pierced his black flesh was one of the many sins of him bullying me being erased in a pound of flesh. He fell hard to the paved court. He gasped for breath. Blood squirted from his mouth. I changed clips as the other boys watched stunned. The big black boy gagged and started to choke on the blood that was quickly filling his lungs. Time seemed to slow down as I watched the boy die. I thought I would feel the same relief I felt when I killed my father. But I felt nothing. I felt empty and hollow, like an old, rotted husk. The other black boys that hung with him started to run. I remembered them laughing at me as I shot them. I remembered how they held me down so he could beat me. I shot several of them. I walked up to the ones that lay on the ground in pain. They cried for their mothers as I shot them in the head. Stop it, James! I heard a voice shout. I turned, and my heart stopped. It was Talea, the beautiful young black girl that had always been kind to me. She looked at me in horror, like I was a monster that crawled out of the pits of hell. I locked eyes with her and raised my gun to my temple. My hands shook, and I started to sob. I don't know why I cried the way I did. This was my plan. This is what I came here to do. Now it was my turn to die. I'm not Oreo Boy, I gasped between sobs. Talea nodded at me as if she understood. She had saved me countless times from being bullied. I remembered her soft touch as she ran her fingers through my hair. her kindness as she saved me from the boys I had just killed. "I'm James, and I'm biracial," I sobbed. Talea's fear seemed to melt away. She smiled weakly through the tears that fell down her beautiful brown cheeks. "You have always been handsome, James. You still are," Talea said softly. I smiled for a moment. I was lost in a fantasy of her being my girlfriend, but I knew it was just that, a fantasy. I nodded at her and mouthed, "Thank you." I pulled the trigger. I heard Talea scream. I started to fall back. It felt like I had already died, and I stepped from my body and watched that old battered body of mine hit the ground. I watched as I started to twitch and die. I looked around and saw my father staring at me. The boys that I had just murdered watched me in silence. The boys shook their heads sadly at me and vanished. My father held out his hand and waited for me to take it. It was almost like it didn't matter that I just killed him. His body is probably still laying on his front porch. I took his hand and looked at him. He smiled at me and we walked away. I didn't know where we were going, but I was, for once in my short life, at peace. Monica. I lived the next week of my life afraid. My last days of school was like a constant panic attack. I swore at any moment the police would barge in and arrest me, but it never came. I don't know what happened to that black girl and her baby. I honestly don't care. I didn't see her again after what I did to her. She didn't return to school. I knew she would come back eventually. This was the hood, and school was the main social point for most people. Even the adults treated the school as more of a hookup club than a place of learning. People talk about her in whispers. It was always some horrible rumor, like her baby's father came back because she put him on child support and killed the baby. This would have been a normal occurrence in the hood. People told the story like they were there, like they saw this lie happen. Others said she was robbed. Everyone had a different story, but none of those stories pointed to me. None mentioned a biracial girl crept into the bathroom and beat her within an inch of her life for cutting out huge swaths of the biracial girl's hair. I guess I had gotten away with it. The house I burned down was a different story. Some unintended good came out of my rage. That house caught several blocks on fire. Most of the homes that burned down were condemned and boarded up, but a few families were displaced. The city started a new housing initiative to rebuild that area. More black families would be housed there. More homes would be built for them. The hood was like a third world country inside of America. It was a tragic refugee camp of freed slaves that America didn't know what to do with. I honestly believe most of black America didn't know how to be civilized. Life for them was all about sex and outshining other poor people that looked like them. The woman I pushed into the fire died. Her kids were taken into the system. That included 2 of the hateful black bitches that attacked me. The stories I heard about the group homes were nightmarish. I prayed those black girls were getting raped every night by some perverted group home staff. I had no sympathy for them. The rage in me had not subsided. I would have to find a way to let what happened to me go. I paid the people who violated me back tenfold. But still, the rage boiled inside of me like hot lava, waiting to erupt. I could not take this rage with me into this new life my father was making for us. I didn't want to put anything he was building for me in jeopardy. He was selling the house that would be my inheritance. But I honestly did not care. I didn't want to inherit the poverty and ghetto that came along with that house. Surprisingly, my father's house sold quickly. He got slightly more than what he asked for. Intact houses that were well maintained were a rarity in the hood. When people saw my father's house was for sale, those that could jumped at the opportunity. It's funny, these black degenerates that have always looked down on my father for his education and accolades. Those who called him a coon or claiming he was trying to act white had no issues trying to move into the place he acquired with his education. It just proved that they hated anyone and anything that was not as ghetto and ignorant as them. The day we left the hood was one of the best days of my life. We loaded a U-Haul filled with our things and drove away. I felt like I was leaving a dilapidated and impoverished African village. Black kids and adults waved at us as we drove past. The look of envy and hate on their faces for us escaping something they could only dream of leaving was as amusing as it was depressing. My life was starting new. I had burned a woman to death, set several blocks on fire, and beat the crap out of a pregnant girl. The best part was I had gotten away with it. I didn't turn back as we crossed the bridge out of the hood. I didn't have any goodbyes in my heart to give. The hood was a nightmare for me that I was happy to escape. My father turned to me and beamed. I have never seen him this happy before. I imagine he was feeling the same things I was feeling. He was happy to escape a plantation that his family was stuck on for many generations. He was the slave that had finally bought freedom for himself and his family. I was proud of my father. This was something deeper to him than it would ever be to me. I'm not sure if it was because I was biracial or because I didn't live the trauma he had. My father was like a lion trapped in the ocean. He felt useless in the hood. Now he had finally found land, and he could roar with pride. We moved to a normal middle-class neighborhood. My father had gotten us a huge house. To think only a short while ago, I was in hell back in the hood. Now I was in heaven. I ran into a peculiar predicament, though. The school was amazing. I was challenged educationally for the first time in my young life. There were many biracials that went to this school. I did not fit in among them. They had never tasted the hood. They have never felt the sting of not being enough. They grew up with both of their parents and the love of both their white and black extended families. I was the ghetto one to them. I talked differently than them, and I was definitely more violent than them. They were afraid of me. I found that here outside the hood, I was not enough for other biracials. The stank and touch of the hood would never leave me. The scars and pain of the hood would forever be etched on me. I found that I hung out with black kids. I made friends with other black girls, and we talked shit about the uppity biracials here. I became one of the black girls in the hood that used to bully me for having a white mom. Now I was bullying other biracials. I didn't care that they were half white, because I was too. It was how snobbish they were. It was how they thought they were better because they had a white parent. I think growing up in the hood made me better than these snobs because I never thought I was better than anyone else. I just wanted to fit in. Here at this school, the biracials were different. Maybe it was a cultural thing forged in poverty and the constant threat of danger and violence that made me feel so out of place here. In the hood, I was the top student in my class. The smartest in the entire school. In this new life, I could barely compete. I was the nigga here, and for some reason that I could not understand, I was okay with that. My father met a beautiful woman from Africa and married her. I was so happy for him. His new wife became the mother I always wanted. I never called her mom, but we had an unspoken bond. She never forced being black on me. She called me mixed race. She would do my hair and would tell me stories of how she grew up in Nigeria. Biracials had their own racial group in most places. They were respected and loved by their families. It seemed that only here in America, the country that boasts to be the most powerful and advanced in the world, yet colorism and racism was still a major problem. White people hated black people, and black people hated biracials. In the hood, biracials were the proverbial whipping boys for black people. We were the closest thing to whiteness that they could ever touch, so they took out all their pain and suffering on us. I would tell my new stepmother some of the things I had suffered at the hands of black people. She would click her tongue in disappointment and say, "You know, back in Nigeria, I would have taken a machete to them. They would not have gotten away with that." I grew to love my stepmother. She understood me. I didn't tell her what I had done to those who had oppressed me, but I felt she would understand if I ever did tell her. Oddly enough, she didn't like black Americans very much. My father was different from the rest that were filled with self-loathing and being the perpetual victim. As the years passed, I went to law school and became a prosecutor in my great state. I made it a point to go after the hood and the disgusting black people that infested it. The more power I had, it seemed like the traumas of my past resurfaced. I didn't care if they were innocent or not. If I got their case and they were from the hood, I made it a mission to lock them up for as long as the judge would allow. I came to understand one important thing about black people. There are black people from the hood, and then there are black people like my father. I went out of my way to be lenient on black people that worked hard and couldn't catch a break. But if you were from the hood, I wanted the book thrown at you. The satisfaction I would get when black women were hauled off to do a lengthy sentence was almost orgasmic. As they cried and begged, I would see those black girls that mocked me, that beat me, and cut my hair. There was no such thing as equality in the justice system. In most cases, you were at the mercy of the prosecutor. I gave biracials the biggest breaks, even the confused ones that were trying too hard to be black. I knew it was only a matter of time until they got tired of the bullying and teasing, until they had enough of not being black enough no matter what they did. I don't ever think I will get over the trauma of what I endured at the hands of black people. Sure, I had power now, and I was exacting my revenge every single day, but it still haunted me. The screams of that woman as I pushed her into the flames echoed in my dreams. I could still smell the stench of her burning flesh. The desperate, pleading look in that pregnant black girl's eyes as I kicked her in the stomach over and over again. It tormented me. Every time I thought about it, I would get angry. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. There was no statute of limitations on murder. This anger has kept me alone and childless. I couldn't stay in a relationship for more than a few months before the man left me. I was too cold, too hardened by what I had endured in the hood. My hate for ghetto black people dripped from me like venom. I didn't want to have a child, and it be subject to the rage that still burned in me. It would not be fair for that poor baby to suffer because I had no love to give it. All I could offer was a cold diet of hate and rage. I knew any child I had would be mixed race. I didn't want them to endure the same hate I had. I was afraid that they would end up like me. I was almost 40 years old and still reeling from the traumas of my childhood. This hate was all I had. When my father passed away, it got worse. Through everything in my life, I always had my father. He would correct my path whenever I went off course. His arms were the only place the rage subsided. My stepmother tried, but she was not my father. She could never reach me like he could. I eventually moved to another state. I tried working for the district attorney's office there, but my rage quickly ended that job. So I opened up my own firm. I started to push for laws that would make biracials their own racial group, and thus give them protections that they currently lacked. In the eyes of the law, biracials were just seen as black, so any hate and oppression we suffered at the hands of the black community was brushed under the rug as black-on-black crime. For the first time in my life, I found peace. Every time I was able to help a biracial girl get justice against black girls that bullied her, the rage would subside. The hood and those ignorant black creatures that infested have destroyed me. Jordan. My time in prison went faster than I thought it would. I kept my head down and let my wounds heal. I had to get several stitches in my anus. The massive wounds where the Aryan leader cut the tattoos of the Brotherhood from me ended up getting infected. I spent a lot of time in the infirmary. It's a hard thing for a man to deal with when he's raped. I felt violated in a way I never thought possible. This man was the leader of the Brotherhood I held in such high esteem, yet he raped me. Homosexuality was against all tenets of the Brotherhood, yet the leader raped me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I would spend many sleepless nights staring at the ceiling in the infirmary. I would cry silently. A part of me died in prison. I would never be able to reclaim who I once was. I think the worst part of being raped, besides the actual rape, was not knowing if I got infected by it. Every 4 months I had to get checked for HIV. Every 4 months I was reminded that I was raped. Laying there in that infirmary bed, I decided I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't know who I was. I wasn't black, nor was I white. I was something in between. Something that was left over. I was neither here nor there. I was confused. I didn't want to be black. I didn't want to be a part of that victimhood mentality that plagued black people. I hated the black blood that ran in my veins. I hated my mother for being a nigger lover. Everything I had clung to for identity and purpose was shattered by each thrust from that rapist. To think that I once looked up to men like him, to strong Aryans that were enforcing the laws of the Brotherhood. Minister Farouk saw me often. If he was not there, then another Muslim brother was by my side. I was thankful for their protection. I could never be a black Muslim. I was honestly done with that cult mindset. I didn't want to believe in anything. I doubted there was a God. If there was, then what was the purpose of biracial people? Why would he allow us to be made? If he loved us so much, then why make us suffer? Minister Farouk told me this life is a test. The test was harder for the believer. I laughed mockingly at him. How could this get any harder? I was lying in a hospital bed in prison. I was beaten, raped, and had my skin peeled off. If this was what it meant to be a believer in the black religion, then I did not want it. When I got out of prison, I would be treated like a nigger. Being a half-black ex-con was just as bad as being full black. I could not run from it now. I was part of a system designed for black people. As much as I tried to avoid it, here I was, another statistic. I didn't control my identity. There was no such thing as being free to choose who you wanted to be when it came to race. You were either white or you're not. Unfortunately, I was not. After several months, I was released from the infirmary. I was sent to Minister Farouk's pod. The black Muslims were vast in numbers in the prison. If you were under the protection of the black Muslims, no one messed with you. But of course, their protection was not without a cost. I had to learn the Quran and pray with the brothers 5 times a day. It was extremely tedious. But I learned to respect and even fear the black Muslims. They were very disciplined. They only feared Allah. Any man who only feared the wrath of their God was dangerous. The black Muslims hustled like any other group in prison. They did not get involved with drugs or the sexual exploitation of the vast amount of homosexuals that infested the prison. But they did smuggle things in. Most of the black Muslims were very intelligent. I would argue they were the smartest group on the yard. Many would come to them for basic stuff like writing letters or poetry. I didn't understand how underrated a good poet was until I came to prison. If you could write even decent poetry, you would never go hungry in prison. As the years quickly drifted by, I became anxious about my release date. I had gotten so used to the routine of life of prison that I didn't know how I would survive without it. The real world was loud, and you couldn't trust anyone. It's odd to say you could trust fellow inmates, but things in here were simple. I knew the black Muslims had my back. If someone attacked me, I would be surrounded by brothers who would die for me. I found that I would do the same for them. We were all black. Yes, even I was. We all worshipped Allah. In prison, that brotherhood was all that mattered. I discovered through therapy that I needed to be part of something. If I wasn't, I felt alone and depressed. I was at my best when I was part of something. This made me vulnerable and dangerous. I was easy prey for the right charismatic leader. I was loyal to a fault and would die for any cause I believed in. This is what made me dangerous. I had to be careful what I allowed myself to be associated with. I was done with the Aryans. If they approached me on the streets, I would probably be right back in prison. My loyalty and need to be part of something made me blind to people who were using me. The Aryan Brotherhood had used me. I had killed for them. I had beat and tortured black men for them. I was willing to breed out the black in me for the sake of the Brotherhood. Yet all I got in return was prison and raped. 4 years of my life were gone. I could never get that time back. But strangely, I was thankful for this time. Maybe Farouk was right in this life being a test. I detested it when I first heard him say that. But now I found peace in the thought that all I have endured was part of some greater purpose or design. My release date was coming up. I was scared of walking out of those prison gates. Minister Farouk and the black Muslims were excited for me. Well, as excited as one could be who was facing life in his hellhole. I felt bad discussing my anxiety with them. They would never get to feel what I'm feeling. They would die within these walls. Don't forget Allah, brother, Minister Farouk said. as the guards called me to roll up. The day had come for me. My 4-year sentence was up. I was walking out of prison. I would soon be a free man. Yet my heart was gripped with fear. See, no one ever tells you how much walking out of prison sucks. It's like rappelling down a mountain. That first initial lean back is the scariest. You're trusting that rope and that hastily tied together Swiss saddle to hold you, to ensure you don't fall and die on the rocks below. This is how walking out of prison felt for me. I was trusting the same rope that locked me away for 4 years to suddenly keep me from falling off that mountain. "Matthews!" a black guard shouted. I have grown fond of this guard. He was also a Muslim. He was not part of the black Muslims. He was just a regular Sunni Muslim man. I honestly didn't know the difference, but apparently there were several major differences between the sects. It was all confusing to me, and I honestly didn't care enough to find out what the differences were. "You have some friends waiting for you by the gate," the black guard said. He pointed to some white men. I recognized them. I sighed deeply. "Those aren't my friends anymore," I replied to the guard. The black guard smiled. He knew what had happened to me in here. He knew who I was when I came into this prison. "Well, if they were to somehow land on your fist," the guard started. He looked around at the other guards, and they all nodded. "None of us here saw anything," the guard finished. I smiled. For some strange reason, I was going to miss prison. I walked out of the front gate with just the clothes on my back and the change in my heart that was forged from my time in prison. "Hey, Jordan, what's going on, brother?" one of the white Aryans shouted. They approached me as the prison gates closed behind me. I took a deep breath of freedom. I looked around at the morning sky. I smiled. I was free of prison, but not yet free of my past. I didn't respond to the Aryan. I just walked up to him and beat him within an inch of his life. The other Aryans did not try to intervene. They were cowards. If these were black Muslims, they would have all been on me. But these white cowards watched as I destroyed a man they called brother. "Look at me, motherfuckers. I'm not Aryan. I'm biracial, and I'm okay with that. Stay the fuck away from me," I roared at the Aryans. Just moments out of prison, and my clothes were splattered with blood. I sighed. "Allahu Akbar, brother," I heard a shout from the yard. I turned to see the black Muslims cheering for me. I looked at the guards. They nodded at me. I was still free. I stared hard at the Aryans and walked away from them. I had a bus to catch. I knew this would not be the last time I saw the Aryans. But at least they now knew I had outgrown them. That I was better than them. To say out loud that I was biracial felt amazing. I can't explain it. I felt a weight or a pressure literally lift from me. It's like I had finally found a home. Denying who I truly was all these years had placed a burden on my soul that I didn't even know was there. I felt like I could breathe air for the first time in my life. I was half black and half white, and that was okay. I didn't hate my black blood anymore. I was not a white man who was tainted. I was the son of a black man and a white woman. I wondered if there were others like me, others who felt as lost and confused as I have felt. Life after prison was slow. It took me some time to get on my feet, to get used to being on my own. About a month after my release, I started to have nightmares. I would relive killing that black man. Some nights, I would find myself back in the Aryan master's cell, him carving the tattoos out of my flesh and raping me. I would wake up drenched in sweat. I started going to church. I thought that getting connected to a religion would help me with the nightmares. Unfortunately, it didn't. I was issued a no-contact order to stay away from my victim's family, but I had to do something. The guilt was eating me alive. I wrote the family a letter and gave it to my parole officer. I hoped that the letter would find itself in the hands of the victim's mother. I needed her to know I was sorry, that I was lost and confused, that I didn't know who I was, but most of all, that I was sorry. 2 months later, I got a call from my parole officer. My victim's family wanted to meet. I was scared. I almost didn't meet them. I was afraid of having to face a nightmare. I was a little boy who was afraid of the monster under the bed. Except I was the monster. I would have to face the demons of my past and the consequences of that past. The hardest thing in the world is looking in the mirror and truly seeing yourself. If it's true that the soul bears the scars of all of our sins and emotional trauma, then my soul had to be on life support. I agreed to meet them. I told them about my life in that letter, of how I struggled with race and identity, of how I thought I was something I was not. I hoped they understood. But even hoping for that was selfish. I murdered their son. Their son was the victim of my internal struggle. I got a light sentence based on the politics of who I was involved with. I bet that was a slap in the face for them. My body shook as I found myself sitting in front of his mother and father. They looked haggard. The father glared at me. I would not blame him if he attacked. I would not even fight back. It was his right to beat the life out of me. My parole officer and a cop were in the room with us. I couldn't tell if they were here for my safety or theirs. I felt like I was going to pass out. I was told to let them speak first. But as his parents stared at me, I started to sob. I don't know why I was crying, but I was. Maybe it was my soul releasing the burden of taking a life. "Why did you take my son from me?" the mother asked. She started to cry. I looked at the father, who was trying his hardest to hold his tears in. He didn't want to look weak in front of me. He was losing the battle to hold his emotion. He clenched his jaw so tightly that I thought his teeth would crack. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. "Because your son saw something in me that I once hated. He exposed something that I tried so hard to hide," I replied. I had to stop as emotion took over me again. "What did he see that you could justify what you did?" the mother asked. People would assume that the mother was the strong one because she was talking, but I knew differently. The mother was resigned to her grief. It was not in her nature to attack and avenge. The father was the strong one. He was waging an internal battle against the nature of a man to avenge his son. He was wrestling with the beast within him. As a man who was locked away with the worst of society, I recognized that beast. "Your son saw the black in me," I replied. Sister's thoughts on Oreo Boy. I despise the name Oreo Boy. Just hearing it makes my blood boil. People could be so cruel in their hate and jealousy. As a monoracial black woman, as you call us, I could never truly see how hateful and utterly racist black people are until my biracial brother was born. I did not see him as anything else than my baby brother. It was hard for me at first to understand or even see that he was struggling. He was a very handsome guy. His hair was long and curly. It was not like regular black hair, but it was not like white hair either. It was stuck in a place between the two. I guess his hair was very much like him. It didn't really fit in anywhere. To me, that's what made him unique. His skin was a beautiful beige color, a honey brown maybe. His eyes were huge and hazel. All the little black girls in my class had a crush on my brother, but my brother was shy. He walked with his beautifully curly head down. He played with his feet as he stood in line. He didn't have many friends. The school we went to was predominantly black. As much as my little brother wanted to fit in, he couldn't. He was like a snowflake in a pool of tar. One could not help but notice him. He shined like a golden ray of sunlight in the darkness, if you catch my meaning. I didn't know him very well. We shared the same father, but had different mothers. He hardly came around. I think my father was ashamed of him. My father got into being pro-black, and he wanted to distance himself from anything that contradicted that. Unfortunately, that included his biracial son. I remember hearing the gunshot early that morning, followed by my mother screaming. I got up and ran to my mother, only to see my father's lifeless body lying on the front porch. He had been shot in the head. I watched as my half-brother ran away. I always knew something was off about him, but I never thought he would do this. Some nights he would come to our house and fall asleep on the chair in our porch. I didn't understand why he did that. He had a home and a mother that loved him. I would set out blankets for him and snacks. He didn't know it was me. I felt sorry for him. Now that my father is gone, I understood him a bit more. He longed for our father. He longed for his attention and love, just like I long for it now. I find myself at my father's grave talking to his headstone for hours. This was how I mourned. I didn't realize that my brother was mourning the death of my father in his heart. That my father died for him a long time ago. Him coming to our house and sleeping on our front porch was his way of trying to hold on to our father. He and I are not so different. I don't hate my half-brother. He was a kid who felt rejected by the world. The one man that could have saved his life by simply telling him he was enough, ignored and rejected him. I can never look at biracial people the same. I don't hate them. I just see them as ticking time bombs. I see my little brother struggle in the eyes of every biracial person I see. It's not right for people to feel so torn and left out by the world. For people to feel so uncomfortable in their own skin. I can only blame a society and a culture that has made race and racial differences the focal point of everyday life. I can't begin to understand what my half-brother struggled with, but it must have been drastic for him to literally burn his skin just to be black enough for the black community that he adored. It's hypocritical for black people to say anything about him. Most of the black community lightens up their skin tone. Some go to the extreme of using bleach or using filters to make them lighter than what they are. My brother was the product of black colorism. He was a victim of the self-hate that black people have for themselves. As much as I want to hate my little brother for murdering our father, I can't. There is something dreadfully wrong with the black community. We hide it well under the pro-black nonsense. The hate for who we are and the color of our skin is never too far from the surface. I feel no one sees black people for the self-hating and self-loathing people we truly are, unlike a biracial who just wants to be black enough. I guess I envy biracials for not being black enough to feel the sting of having unambiguous black skin. Author's thoughts on Oreo Boy. Oreo Boy's story was very hard for me to write. I could relate to Oreo Boy more than all of the other characters in this book. There were times as a kid when I wished I was darker just so I could be accepted by the black community, so the bullying would stop. I would even use spray-on tan to look darker, but it was not just my skin tone, it was my features as well. I remember nights when I contemplated suicide. The bullying and the loneliness was overwhelming. To top it off, whenever I was called a nigger by some racist white person, or had my hair touched by all the white kids in the class because it was spongy, I had no one to talk to about it. I was often the token black person among my white friends. I was the safe black guy. I was still a nigger to them, but I was white enough for them not to be afraid of me. I feel all of us biracials can relate to Oreo Boy. His short story was the ultimate struggle with being alone and feeling out of place. Oreo Boy's story was based on true events. I was Googling stories about biracials being bullied, and I came across his story. I changed his name to respect his family, but most of the events that happened were based on the real life of a biracial kid. Of course, I highly dramatized it and filled in some blanks. Nonetheless, his struggle and pain were real. Knowing this story was based on actual events made it all the harder for me to write. Writing Oreo Boy's tale sent me through an emotional roller coaster. I cried with Oreo Boy. I felt alone and cold with him. I felt the anger of being half of something I didn't want to be. I am Oreo Boy in a way. I think all of us biracials are. We have to find a way to love ourselves. We must be enough for ourselves and not care what the world thinks. Like Oreo Boy, my father was a black man. I never met him, but I have always longed to. I wanted to be connected to that black side, to parade my father around and say, "See, I'm black just like you." Oreo Boy's longing for his black father to validate him was something I felt deeply. I don't understand what it is with black fathers making bastard kids they don't want. Maybe the curse is not being biracial. Maybe it's being part of a race that hates itself and is still coming to terms with their own demons of colorism. Either way, may God bless Oreo Boy's poor soul, and I hope he found some peace in death that was denied him in life. Author's thoughts on Monica. Monica is the story of so many biracial girls and women. All of their accomplishments are thrown under the blanket of, it's because she's half white. I honestly think that biracial women and girls get bullied worse. Biracial women are beautiful for the most part. They are closer to the standard of American beauty than black girls are. This is shown in everyday life. Black men prefer lighter-skinned or biracial women over darker-skinned black women. So black women and girls hate them because they hate the black skin that they were born with. Of course, they'll never admit it. They mask it under anger and aggression. They claim that the biracial woman feels like she is better than darker-skinned women as an excuse to cover up their jealousy. When in reality, the biracial woman just wants to be accepted and fit in. The biracial woman often goes the extra mile to try and be blacker, to overcompensate for her lighter skin tone. But no matter what she does, it's never enough. Monica was a biracial girl who got tired of the hate and bullying. It happened to her so much that she learned to hate black people. She despised them. She never got over what was done to her. The hypocrisy of black people is they are the first to talk about white-on-black racism, but want to ignore or get upset when a biracial calls them out for being just as oppressive to biracials as white people have been to them. Black people get away with it because biracials are still considered black under the supposedly abolished one-drop rule. So being racially oppressed and victimized by black people is just seen as black-on-black violence and bullying and not the hate crime it is. Monica's story was inspired by several biracial women I have talked to who have been beaten and have had their hair cut by angry black girls who were envious of their straighter, curlier hair. But most of all, by my wife. My wife is a dark-skinned black woman who admitted to seeing a biracial girl get beat and getting her hair cut by black girls simply because she had that supposed good hair. Monica is not a real person, but her story is based on real trauma that biracial women face every day. I hoped to highlight that black people can't play the victim to white people when black people subject biracial men and women to the exact same hate and violence that was once done to them. I feel that's one of the reasons why black people get so in their feelings when a biracial is telling their truth. It exposes the dark secret that the black community brushes under the rug next to the rampant sexual assault that infests the black community. It is exposing black people to be just as racist and hateful as the race that used to enslave them. Biracials are waking up and breaking free of the chains of the black community. Though I hope biracials don't get their revenge like Monica did. If they chose to, I would understand. Author's thoughts on Jordan. I enjoyed writing Jordan's story. His tale is the ultimate example of transformation. It shows the massive identity crisis we as biracials go through and endure. It's not very pleasant, and it often scares us in ways we can't imagine. Jordan is a real person. He is a brother I ran into on YouTube. I have a pro-biracial channel that attracts all kinds of people. This character is based on him. He was a biracial white supremacist. When I heard him talk about it on one of my panels, I was instantly fascinated. You often hear of biracials being pro-black, of them doing whatever they can to prove their blackness. At the end of the day, biracials crave to feel accepted, to be part of one of their communities. It would make sense that a half-white biracial with blue eyes and tan skin would gravitate more to the white extremes, just as black-looking biracials lean more towards black extremes. Though this story is based on a real person, I took major liberties. Jordan's story is more fictional than anything else. I spent a lot of time talking to Jordan and getting to know this brother. Most people don't know that authors study people. We can see things in people that others may not see. We can see the intricate little pieces of that person and build a character off it. To Jordan, this character is very real. He can relate to and feel this character because it's based on him. To others, they see a confused mixed-race man who wants so deeply to belong that he joins a hate group. Though he knows this hate group is just using him, he still clings to it. Again, the need to belong is essential to people who feel like they don't belong anywhere. I also saw myself in Jordan. Jordan is strong. He's a fighter. He wants to be a warrior for a cause. He has an addictive personality that allows him to put his life and freedom on the line for anything he believes in. He is loyal to a fault. He does all these things to feel accepted, to prove his worth. Many of us feel we have to go above and beyond to be seen as part of the race that makes up half of us. I wanted to show Jordan's change. Most times, change comes after something drastic happens. Change is often forced. It took prison and the rejection and betrayal from the brotherhood that Jordan sacrificed a lot for in order for him to change. Jordan wanted to heal. He wanted to face the consequences of his confusion. In his struggle to find his identity, he murdered someone. He did his time, and that alone was not enough to appease his heart and soul for the life he took. I wanted to show Jordan facing his past by talking to the parents of his victim. They will never understand Jordan's internal struggle. They were never meant to. But it's powerful to see Jordan speak his truth and struggle out loud to the victim's mother because he saw the black in me. Most who have not struggled like biracials have with identity would never understand how enraging it is to have an identity that you carefully constructed to be accepted suddenly threatened. It's painful. It puts you in a position where you feel you have to act drastically to defend your identity and not be exposed as the fraud most of us are. I know fraud is a strong word, but the truth is most of us are frauds. We are biracial. The more we fight against that fact, the more damage we do to ourselves. We are not black or white. We are both. Jordan finally learned that there is power in self-acceptance and healing in loving who you are. Epilogue. Biracials are a black people's problem, a problem that they created, and now, like everything else, they refuse to accept accountability for and atone for. We are essentially the hate that hate created. Most of us would never admit this because we like to imagine that our parents loved each other, that they had no other motives but love and wanting to make a family with the person they loved. But facts remain. We were created out of self-hate. Most black men hate themselves and thus their own women. They can't stand to create a baby that is as black as them. So they seek out white women or any non-black women to try to lighten up the blackness to something they deem is better, something they can look at and be proud of. In my opinion, this is where most of the biracial struggle comes from. Black women are just as guilty of this as black men, but black men do it much more. It's an odd dynamic. The white parent never sees us as white. We are just their black child. It's a hard pill to swallow. I know my Arab mother never once identified me as her Arab son. She never saw herself in me, even though I came from her womb and body. I was always her black son. That's the very first rejection we endure. We are not enough for our non-black parent to embrace us as their race. We are thrown to blackness. Then when we get into the world thinking we are black, the black community with their self-hate and struggles with colorism lets us know we are not black enough. We are forced into this war, this internal struggle to have an identity. At home, we are told by both parents that we are black, and the world tells us something different. We end up arguing and fighting with black people to affirm our blackness. To keep it real, we can't blame black people for not wanting to claim us. Our other half doesn't. The black community has every right to define blackness and what blackness is. If you don't want to claim us, then kindly stop making us. I feel like this book showed that struggle. There is power in saying, I'm biracial and I'm proud. There's healing in that statement. We are the bastard sons and daughters of two races that hate each other. There is a loneliness and pain that seems to be our birthright. I encourage my biracial brothers and sisters to love the skin they're in, to look in the mirror and say, I am enough, because you are. You're biracial, and you're an amazing person. You're beautiful, you're handsome, and most of all, you are enough. This has been Am I Enough? A Biracial Story. Written by Jesse A. MacBeth. Narrated by Terry Briscoe. Copyright 2022 by Jesse A. MacBeth. Production copyright by Jesse A. MacBeth.